It was my first graveyard shift, and I remember feeling both excited and uneasy as I slipped in the patrol car just before midnight. The station was quiet, too quiet, like the air itself was holding its breath. I hadn't been on the streets alone at this hour before, and every creak and hum of the car felt louder than it should. My flashlight rested on the passenger seat. My radio crackled faintly, and a familiar scent of coffee and leather filled the cab. Somehow, it was comforting and alien at the same time. The first hour passed slowly, more slowly than I expected. The streets were empty, save for a stray cat that darted across the asphalt. The town looked different at night. Sharper shadows, deeper silence. Streetlights flickered in the distance, throwing jagged shapes across cracked sidewalks. I kept telling myself this was normal, that the graveyard shift was mostly boredom and paperwork. That's what they told me. But something in the air felt off, a tension I couldn't name. Then the call came through. Deputy, we've got a report. Someone's seen movement near the old warehouse district. Could be kids, could be... I don't know. Go check it out, the dispatcher said. Her voice was calm, almost too calm, like she'd already forgotten to call the moment she made it. I answered, copy that. On my way. My voice sounded strange in the car, hollow, even to me. I shifted gears and headed toward the warehouse district. The radio was quiet after that, but the silence fell heavy. I passed shuttered stores, graffiti-stained walls, and piles of trash that seemed to lean toward the road, as if watching me drive by. My headlights caught glimpses of broken glass, of doors swinging slightly in the wind, or maybe it was my imagination. When I arrived, the street was empty. The warehouses loomed like silent, sunless towers. Their paint was peeling, windows cracked and black. I parked the car and stepped out, the chill of the night biting at my neck. My boots crunched on broken asphalt, and I adjusted the flashlight. The beam trembled slightly in my hand. I kept telling myself I'd walked these streets before, during day shifts, and it had always seemed fine. But this was different. Everything seemed closer, sharper, and somehow more watchful. I walked along the side of one warehouse, ears straining. The wind whispered through gaps in the metal siding, carrying the faint scent of something, oil, rust, maybe rot. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked, too far away to pinpoint. I checked behind me reflexively, even though I knew no one was there. Shadows shifted, but only with the sway of my flashlight. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I rounded the corner and stopped. Something moved, a figure. At first, I thought it was a person crouched in the shadows, maybe watching the street. But the longer I stared, the less certain I became. The outline blurred, like heat rising off asphalt on a summer day, or fog curling around the ground in a way that shouldn't happen in the middle of October. My pulse quickened, and I called softly into the darkness. Hello? This is Deputy. Are you okay? Silence answered me. Just silence, thick and expectant. I took another step forward, and the figure didn't move, or maybe it moved too subtly to notice. I raised my flashlight higher, trying to pierce the shadow. The air grew colder. My breath formed clouds that hung in the light briefly before vanishing. Then I heard it, a faint click like footsteps or a shutter closing, but soft, deliberate. Behind me, I spun around. Nothing, just the warehouses, the piles of trash, the empty street. I told myself I was imagining it. First night jitters. The mind plays tricks. I tried to laugh it off, a short, humorless sound that made my own nerves worse. My hand rested on the grip of my flashlight, ready to swing, ready to protect, ready for something, but nothing came. I moved cautiously toward the back of the warehouse, scanning every shadow. The streetlight at the far end flickered again, and I thought I saw movement near a stack of crates. My stomach clenched. I edged closer, flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The crates were empty, nothing at all, but the feeling of eyes on me didn't fade. It pressed down on me like water, cold and invisible. I tried to call the dispatcher again to ask if anyone else was around, if maybe a patrol buddy could come check this with me. But the radio was dead, only static hissed in my ear. The silence in the street seemed to expand, swallowing my words. I took a deep breath, shaking it off. It was fine. It had to be fine. I kept moving. Around the corner, another warehouse loomed. Its doors were boarded, but one had a gap. I peeked inside. Darkness stretched beyond my flashlight's reach. Empty except for old shelving and the smell of mildew. I stepped closer. That's when I heard it. Soft, almost imperceptible, like a shuffle across the concrete floor behind me. My head whipped around. Nothing. I told myself again, first night jitters. Maybe a raccoon. Maybe the wind. But deep down, I knew something wasn't right. My heartbeat thudded in my ears. I felt exposed, small, intruding in a place that didn't want visitors. I was about to step back when I heard a voice. Not over the radio. Not from a phone. It came from somewhere inside the warehouse. Soft, distant, almost a whisper. "Hey!" My stomach sank. The voice was human, maybe male, maybe female. I couldn't tell, but it sounded wrong. Flat, monotone, like someone had been repeating for hours. My flashlight swung toward the sound, and in that moment, I saw a shadow move at the edge of my light. Quick, fleeting, and gone. I froze. My mind raced. Should I call for backup? Should I go in? But I was alone, and yet I couldn't leave. Not yet, not without knowing what, or who, was there. I stepped forward, slowly, the flashlight trembling in my hand. Every footstep echoed, loud and final. I called out again, my voice steadier than I felt. "Hello? Anyone in there?" The whisper came again, closer this time. "Hey!" Then nothing. Only the echo of my own words bouncing off concrete walls. I reached the door and peered in. Empty. Dust motes floated in the air, catching the beam of my light. The warehouse was deserted. And yet, I couldn't shake it. The sense that something had been there, had watched me, had waited. I ran my hand along the doorframe, feeling the cold metal. The hairs on my arms stood up. My brain screamed at me to leave, to call someone, to forget it. But I stayed, because I had seen it. Or at least, I thought I had. A movement in the shadows. A flicker of something not quite human. And it had noticed me too. I backed away slowly, keeping my flashlight trained on the doorway. The whisper came one last time, so close I felt it on my neck. "Hey!" I spun around. Nothing. Just the empty street, the cold wind, and the weight of silence pressing in from all sides. I got back in my car and locked the doors, hands still shaking. My radio crackled back to life. The dispatcher asking if everything was okay. I forced a calm voice. "Yeah, just a false alarm. Nothing here." But I knew it wasn't nothing. Something had been there, watching, waiting, and it didn't want to be found, but it wanted me to know it was there. I drove away slowly, headlights cutting through the fog that had started to settle along the streets. Every shadow looked like eyes, every sound like footsteps. My pulse wouldn't slow, not even after I turned off the warehouse district and onto the main road. I didn't sleep that night. Even now, when I think back to that first call at midnight, I can still feel the eyes, still hear the whisper, still feel the weight of the streets, empty and alive, as if they remember every step I took and every fear I let show. It was my first graveyard shift, and I had already learned one thing. Some places are better left alone. Some calls are better left unanswered. But I didn't leave, and that's how it started. The fog was heavier than I had expected that night. It clung to the trees and the edges of the road, thick and wet, curling around the patrol car like something alive. I had just left the warehouse district behind me, still shaking from the first call at midnight. And now the road stretched before me, empty except for the low beam of my headlights cutting through the gray haze. It smelled damp, earthy, and faintly of decay. The kind of smell that makes your stomach tighten for reasons you can't explain. I had been patrolling the outskirts near the cemetery, a part of town most people avoided after dark. It wasn't officially off limits, but locals whispered about how the ground there didn't rest as it should. Stories of bodies disappearing, graves left open, shadows moving where no one should be. I had laughed at those stories during training, but now, alone, the weight of them settled in my chest like a stone. I parked near the cemetery's edge and stepped out, flashlight in hand. The fog swallowed the light, leaving only a short cone that barely illuminated the gravestones in front of me. Their white surfaces glistened wetly, black streaks running down the carved names, as if the stone itself had been crying. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. My first shift had already rattled me, and the night seemed determined to keep going. The wind whispered through the trees, soft but deliberate. It sounded like words if I listened too closely, like it was trying to speak to me, to warn me. I shook my head, telling myself it was the wind, nothing more. But then I noticed it. A figure standing at the far edge of the cemetery. At first, I thought it was just a trick of the fog, a shadow cast by a leaning tree. But it moved, slow, deliberate, almost floating. My pulse jumped. I aimed my flashlight at it, the beam cutting to the fog, but when the light hit, the figure vanished. I blinked, wondering if my eyes were playing tricks. I had been patrolling these roads for years, but the darkness felt different tonight, watching me, waiting. I started walking toward where I had seen it. The fog muffled my footsteps, but it also swallowed the sounds from around me. The world felt smaller and larger at the same time, like I was walking inside a dream I couldn't wake from. Every time I thought I caught movement, it disappeared before I could get a clear look. Shadows stretched and contracted at the edge of my vision, and I had to fight the urge to turn and run. I rounded a row of headstones and stopped. The figure was there again, just beyond the light's reach. I called out, voice shaking more than I wanted. "Hello? Anyone there?" The fog swallowed my words immediately. No reply. I stepped closer, heart hammering. My flashlight trembled in my hand. The figure flickered, like a candle in the wind. Then it was gone again. I stopped and listened. My own breathing sounded loud in my ears. Somewhere in the distance, I thought I heard something moving, a rustle, a shuffle, but it could have been the fog, the trees, or my imagination. But I knew it wasn't imagination. My gut told me someone or something was there, just out of reach. I forced myself to move again, trying to calm my thoughts. I had a job to do. I had to check the cemetery, make sure no one was trespassing, make sure nothing illegal, or worse, was happening. But with each step, the feeling of being watched grew stronger. My flashlight flickered, briefly plunging me into darkness. When it came back, I swear the figure was closer. Or maybe the fog had just shifted. I called over the radio, hoping for a voice, for a presence that was real and human. "Dispatch, this is Deputy. I'm checking the cemetery. Everything looks clear so far." Static answered me. I fiddled with the dials. Tried again. Only more static. A chill ran down my spine. Alone, with the fog pressing on all sides, I felt exposed. My training told me to stay calm, to keep moving, to make my presence known. But my hands were sweaty on the flashlight, and my legs felt heavier than usual, as if the fog itself was resisting my steps. Then I saw it again. Another figure, or maybe the same one. It moved along the edge of the graves, gliding, almost floating, the fog wrapping around like a cloak. My stomach twisted. This time, I noticed something about it. It didn't have a face, or if it did, it was hidden in shadow. I swung my flashlight in its direction. Nothing. Empty fog. I whispered to myself. Try to convince myself this was nonsense. Just fog. Just shadows. You're imagining it. But I didn't believe it. Not fully. I could feel a presence, patient, cold, observing me. I quickened my pace, trying to cover the distance between myself and the figures. But every time I thought I was closing in, they vanished, disappeared into the mist before I could see anything real. I began to doubt my own senses. Was I losing it? The first night jitters shouldn't feel like this. This was more than nerves. I took a deep breath, trying to steady myself. I could see the outlines of trees beyond the cemetery wall, dark shapes bending in the fog. I remembered a story my old sergeant had told me about a patrol he did years ago. He swore he saw figures moving the fog near the same cemetery, but when he went after them, nothing was ever found. He told it like a joke, but now I understood the weight in his voice, the caution in his eyes. I stopped near a leaning gravestone, my flashlight illuminating a name I couldn't quite read. The fog seemed thicker here, curling around the stone, making it look alive. That's when I felt it. A shift in the air, a coldness creeping up my back, brushing against my neck. I spun around. Nothing. But the sense of being watched, of being stalked, intensified. Every instinct screamed at me to leave, but I had to keep moving, had to finish the patrol. I continued along the path, flashlight beam darting from shadow to shadow. Figures appear at the edge of the fog, always just out of reach, always disappearing when I tried to get a closer look. My mind began to play tricks. I thought I saw one step closer, and suddenly I was sure it had moved behind me. But when I turned, nothing was there. I realized I was holding my breath, tensing every muscle, listening for the slightest sound. Every rustle, every whisper of wind made me flinch. At one point, I thought I saw multiple figures, more than one. They moved slowly, silently, weaving between the gravestones like ghosts. I called out again, louder this time, tried to assert myself, to break whatever spell the fog seemed to have me under. "Hey, who's there?" The response was only the wind, the fog, and the muffled crunch of my own boots on the wet ground. My voice sounded hollow in the mist. And then I saw it one last time. A shadow, larger now, gliding closer, just at the edge of my light. My chest tightened. My pulse raced. I raised a flashlight, swung it toward the figure, and it vanished. Completely. I stood there, frozen, staring into fog that seemed to stretch endlessly. For a long moment, I didn't breathe, didn't move, just listen. The cemetery was silent now, except for the whisper of the wind and the faint hum of distant traffic that didn't reach the side of the fog. I realized with a sinking feeling that I had no idea where the figures had gone, or they ever existed at all. My mind raced with questions I couldn't answer. Was I being followed, watched, or was this just a fog playing tricks on me, magnifying my fears? I turned and walked back to my patrol car slowly. Every shadow in the fog now a potential threat. The fog seemed to pulse around me, wrapping tighter, pushing me forward, urging me to leave. I didn't run, but I kept my pace brisk, eyes darting in every direction. The road back felt longer than before, the shadows darker, the cold more biting. When I finally reached the car, I fumbled with the door, hands trembling. I slid inside and locked the doors, heart still pounding. The fog clung to the windows, the headlights barely piercing it. I sat there, breathing heavily, telling myself it was over, but I knew it wasn't. Something had been out there, something patient, something that watched and waited, and I couldn't shake the feeling that it hadn't gone anywhere. Even now, I can remember where the fog moved, curling around the gravestones like smoke, thick and unyielding. I remember the shadows, fleeting and impossible, and the whispers I thought I heard just beyond the reach of reason. That night, I learned that some places are alive, and some nights carry weight beyond what the eyes can see. The shadows in the fog had been waiting, and I had walked straight into them. The call came in just after 2 a.m. The dispatcher's voice was calm, routine, but the words cut through the quiet of my patrol car like a knife. "Deputy, a local reports a missing friend. Last seen near the woods on Pine Hollow Road. Family's concerned." I acknowledged, trying to keep my voice steady. "Copy that. On my way." But I didn't feel steady. My first night on graveyard shift had already shown me how quickly things could twist. Shadows in warehouses, shapes in fog near the cemetery. I told myself that was nerves, first night jitters. But now, heading toward the woods, my chest tightened with a kind of fear I couldn't shake. The road to Pine Hollow was narrow and uneven, flanked by towering pines that swallowed the headlights. Every so often, a branch scraped against a patrol car, tapping like a skeleton's knuckle. I told myself it was nothing, just a tree, just the wind, but the thought made my stomach churn. I arrived at the reporting party's house. A man, probably in his 30s, stood on the porch in a bathrobe, pacing back and forth. His face was pale, eyes wide. He went out jogging near the woods an hour ago. He didn't come back. He wouldn't do this, not without telling me. I nodded, notebook in hand, though I felt foolish writing down what I could already see. Panic. I asked a few questions, but the answers were fragmented, nervous, rushed. The missing man's name was Ben. He ran every morning, but never at night and never alone. And now he was gone. I drove to the edge of the woods, flashlight ready, radio silent except for static that hissed in the background. The fog hadn't lifted since the last patrol. It had only grown thicker, curling around the pines like smoke. The road ended abruptly, turning into a dirt path littered with leaves and mud. I parked, stepped out, and felt the cool night settle over me like a heavy blanket. The first footprints I saw were fresh, small, shoed, and heading into the woods. I followed cautiously, flashlight sweeping side to side, the trees pressing close, their branches clawing at the fog. I tried to call out, "Ben, it's the deputy. Can you hear me?" My voice felt weak, swallowed immediately by the night. No answer. I moved deeper. The footprints were clear at first, but then they stopped, just ended. Not a single mark beyond a certain point. I stared at the dirt, mud, and leaves, half expecting to see a trail continue. But there was nothing, just the mist and silence. I shook my head, telling myself maybe he had jumped off the path, gone off the trail, or maybe someone had taken him. But the sudden emptiness left me with a strange, hollow feeling. I couldn't explain why, but the forest didn't feel right. It felt alive, watching, patient. Then I heard it, a whisper, soft, distant, almost like the wind, but it had shape, a syllable. "Hey!" My heart skipped a beat. I spun, flashlight swinging. The fog twisted and turned, shadows moving just at the edges of my light. Nothing. "Ben." I called again, louder this time, with more urgency. My own voice seemed alien, harsh in the stillness. No reply, only the whisper again, closer now, brushing my ear. I ducked instinctively. "Hey!" I froze. My mind screamed at me to leave, to retreat, to call for backup. But something, stubbornness, duty, fear of looking weak, kept me moving forward. I traced the path where the footprints had ended, trying to find any sign of struggle, anything that could tell me what had happened. The forest was oppressive. The fog twisted around the trunks, the branches, the low shrubs. Every shadow seemed alive. Every rustle of leaves made my pulse spike. I felt watched. I knew I was being watched. And every step I took seemed to echo back at me, unnaturally loud, like the forest itself was mocking me. Then I heard it, a soft cry, distant, trembling, human. It didn't last long. A single, broken sound. I ran toward it, flashlight beam cutting through the fog, heart hammering. But when I reached the place, there was nothing. No figure, no footprints, no signs anyone had been there at all. Only the mud and the mist, silent and unyielding. I stopped, trying to catch my breath, trying to convince myself it was just nerves. But the cries had been real, or at least my mind made them real. My pulse was too fast, my hands too shaky, and the fog seemed to press closer, curling around my legs like smoke, hiding whatever was just out of reach. I followed the faint trail of broken twigs and scuffed leaves. Every so often, the footprints reappeared, always interrupted by a stretch of nothing. It was as if someone had simply vanished into ground. My rational mind searched for explanations. Maybe the man had fallen into a depression, wandered off the path, gotten lost. But something in me whispered that it wasn't that simple. I heard whispers again, this time multiple, overlapping, words I couldn't understand. Soft murmuring, teasing, close and far at the same time. I spun in a circle, flashlight cutting through the haze. Every movement seemed to produce more whispers, more shadows shifting just beyond my sight. I felt my pulse in my throat, sweat starting to bead on my forehead. The more I moved, the more the forest seemed to twist around me. The trail of footprints, Ben's footprints, became erratic. Some were large, some small, some normal shoes, others barefoot impressions. And then they stopped, abruptly. Nothing, not a sign of struggle, not a mark in the dirt, just gone. I whispered his name again, more to myself than anyone else. "Ben, where are you?" The answer, if it could be called that, was a faint, desperate sob that disappeared before it could even form words. The fog seemed to carry it away. My stomach twisted. I wanted to run, to get back to the road, to the safety of the patrol car, but my feet moved forward anyway, toward whatever it was that had vanished. I came to a small clearing. Moonlight filtered faintly through the fog, making the scene feel surreal. The footprints were gone. The whispers faded. but the feeling of being watched intensified. Every tree looked like it had eyes. Every shadow like a figure waiting. I could feel in my bones. Whatever had taken Ben, if anything had, was still here, still observing. I called the dispatcher again, voice trembling now. Dispatch. I need backup. Missing person near Pine Hollow Woods. Static. The line went dead. I slammed the radio down, heart hammering. Alone. Completely alone. And the forest around me seemed to lean in, patient, like it had all the time in the world. I shone my flashlight in every direction, scanning for movement. That's when I noticed something else. Small twigs bent unnaturally. Indentations in the mud too precise. Too deliberate to be random. Shadows that didn't move with the fog. Something or multiple somethings had been here, had passed through, had watched me, and I had been walking right into it. Then I heard it clearly. A low human voice, but not Ben's. Slow, deliberate, almost mocking, whispering my name. Deputy? I swung the flashlight, trying to find the source. Nothing. Just fog, trees, and the empty air. My stomach dropped. I realized I didn't know which way led out anymore. The clearing looked different than before, as if it had shifted while I wasn't looking. Shadows lengthened, twisted, corners of the woods seeming to close in. I ran. At first, just a few steps. Then full speed, stumbling over roots, slipping in mud. The whispers followed, circling, fading, returning. Every time I slowed, they came closer. Every time I paused, the fog seemed to thicken, pressing against me. Finally, I reached the edge of the woods where the trail should have returned to the road. But it didn't. Just more trees, more fog, no path. The road had vanished, swallowed by night and mist. My flashlight trembled in my hands, my chest heaving. I felt trapped, small, insignificant in the eyes of the forest. And then I heard it one last time, a faint cry, almost a laugh, almost a scream. So near I could have sworn it came from inside my head. I stumbled, falling to my knees, mud soaking through my uniform. My flashlight caught something, just for a moment, a figure, too fast, too dark, too fleeting. And then it was gone. I got up and ran blindly, branches tearing at my sleeves, roots tripping me, until I saw faint lights in the distance. My patrol car, safe, or at least familiar. I reached it, slammed the door, locked it, and just sat there, shaking. Mud and sweat ran down my face, heart hammering, breath coming in gasps. I didn't call it in immediately. I couldn't. My voice would have betrayed me. My mind was spinning with images of footprints ending in thin air, whispers in the fog, fleeting shadows, cries that disappear before they formed. Ben. I didn't find him, and I didn't want to go back in there. But I knew someone or something was still out there, watching, waiting. And that night, the woods didn't just take him. They took a piece of me too, a piece I could never get back. Even now, thinking about that night makes the hairs on my arms stand up. The whispers, the footsteps, the sudden emptiness where there should have been a trail, they haunt me. And I know they're still there, somewhere in the fog, just beyond the reach of sight and reason, patient, waiting for the next one who wanders too far. It was one of those nights where the road felt like it stretched forever. Pine Hollow Road, narrow, winding, lined with trees so thick their branches locked overhead, was almost invisible in the darkness, save for the car's headlights cutting a thin swath through the black. I had been driving for a while, patrolling a remote route we'd been assigned after a string of late-night break-ins. Nothing major, nothing dangerous, or so we thought, but the air felt wrong. Heavy, silent in a way that made every creak of the car sound like a footstep. I glanced at patrol radio, humming softly beside me, the green light blinking in time with my heartbeat. That little hum had always been comforting during quiet nights. It was a connection to the world, to someone, anyone, in case something went wrong. But tonight, it didn't feel comforting. Tonight, it felt fragile, as if the hum could break and leave me alone in the dark forever. The first crackle came soft, almost imperceptible. A static hiss, like someone dragging a hand across a chalkboard far away. I paused, listening. Then a voice came, low, distorted, garbled. My name. Deputy? Deputy? I frowned, gripping the wheel tighter. Hello? Dispatch. My voice sounded small in the cabin of the car, swallowed immediately by the hum of the radio. Static answered me. I fiddled with the knobs, checked the frequencies. The signal was intermittent, like something was interfering. And then it happened again. Deputy? Deputy? The voice was closer this time, overlapping the static in a way that felt deliberate. I could hear the syllables, stretching unnaturally, distorted yet unmistakable. My stomach twisted. The roads were empty. There was no one out here. The nearest house was miles away. I told myself it was a prank, some kid with a scanner, messing with the police frequencies. Rational explanations. But rational explanations felt hollow when the voice spoke again. The syllables stretched, warped. My pulse quickened. I rolled down the window slightly, listening for any sound outside. Nothing, only the wind, rustling branches, and the faint hum of the engine. I kept driving, telling myself to ignore it, to move on, to finish the patrol. But the static continued, whispering my name at irregular intervals, closer, farther, slower, faster. Every time I tried to pinpoint it, it moved, impossible to locate. My knuckles were white on the steering wheel. I passed a curve in the road, the fog rolling in thicker than before. My headlights barely reached the edge of the asphalt. I noticed shadows flitting at the corners of my vision. Tree limbs? Maybe, but I had the distinct sense that something was following, just beyond the light, moving in tandem with the voice on the radio. Deputy? I spoke again into the radio, voice firmer, trying to break the tension. Dispatch. Identify yourself. Nothing. Only static, broken by that distorted, drawn-out whispering of my own name. I started talking to myself, trying to anchor my mind. Okay, think. It's just static. It's just a malfunction. There's a rational explanation. But the sound didn't feel like a malfunction. It felt aware, targeted, personal. The road twisted sharply, and I slowed. The fog swirled, curling around the headlights like smoke, hiding everything beyond a few feet. I thought I saw something move in the fog, a figure, maybe, but when I blinked, it was gone. My pulse thudded. The radio hissed again, and this time, the voice wasn't just saying my name. It added something else. A soft, mocking laugh. Almost a human sound, but warped like metal scraping across glass. My stomach clenched, and I slammed a hand against the wheel. Who's there? I called into the night, but the trees swallowed my voice. My headlights cut only a few yards ahead. Nothing, just fog, darkness, and the feeling of being watched. I thought about turning back, calling for backup, retreating to something familiar, but something held me in place. Curiosity, fear, duty, maybe all three. I needed to know what was happening, even if I didn't want to. The voice came again. Deputy slow, deliberate, drawn out. This time I thought I saw a movement behind it, a shadow flickering in my peripheral vision. My heart jumped. I swung the car slightly, trying to catch a glimpse, but nothing was there. Just fog, just static, just my own racing pulse. I tried to reason it away, telling myself I was tired, my senses on edge, my nerves raw from the first week of graveyard shifts. But that didn't explain the cold that had seeped into my chest, the hairs standing on the back of my neck, the feeling that the night itself had turned against me. I slowed the car to a crawl. The road was barely visible. I could feel something in the fog now. Pressure, almost tangible, pressing against the car, surrounding it. My breathing was loud. My hands were shaking. I kept flicking the radio knobs, desperate for a real voice, a human voice. Static, whispers, my name, and now, just faintly, a sound like footsteps outside the car. I froze, eyes darting from the fog to the radio. The footsteps didn't match the rhythm of the car or the road. They were soft, careful, circling. My heartbeat slammed in my ears. I gripped the wheel tighter, fighting the instinct to open the door and run. Though I knew I'd be foolish to leave the car, the radio hissed again. The PUDI, closer now, almost inside the car, though nothing was there. The sound twisted and warped, unrecognizable. And then for a brief moment, I thought I heard Ben's voice, The missing man from last week, whispering my name through the static. My stomach dropped. I shook my head violently. No, that couldn't be real. That was impossible. My mind was running, tying shadows to shapes, static to voices, fear to memories. But the voice didn't stop. It didn't pause. It followed me along the road, weaving through the static, relentless, patient, knowing my name as if it had been waiting to speak it for years. The fog thickened. My headlights struggled against it, carving out only a few feet of visibility. Shapes moved just beyond the light. Branches snapped, though there was no wind. And through it all, the radio continued its distorted chant. Deputy, deputy, slower now, dragging, almost breathing. I felt my pulse in my throat, my hands trembling as I gripped the wheel. Rational thought fled. The road no longer felt like a road. The trees weren't just trees. The fog wasn't just fog. And the radio, it wasn't just a radio. It was something else. Watching, listening, waiting. I thought about turning back. Maybe if I drove faster, the voices would fade, the fog would lift, and the night would return to normal. But the thought made my stomach twist. The static didn't obey distance. It didn't obey reason. It followed me, persistent, intimate, calling me out by name as though it knew who I was in ways no one else could. I took a deep breath, trying to calm myself. Try to remember that I was trained, experienced enough to handle these things. But training didn't cover the feeling of eyes and mist. The sound of whispers threaded through static, the gnawing certainty that I was not alone. And I wasn't. I could feel it. Not a person. Not human. Something old. Patient. Lurking in the static, in the fog, in the space between heartbeat and breath. It was there, just beyond perception, and it had my name. For hours, I drove that road, cursed by the static, following shapes that vanished before I could reach them, listening to whispers that became voices, and voices that became laughter. The fog didn't lift. The night didn't end. And the radio never truly went quiet. Even now, when I close my eyes, I hear it. The soft, warped calling of my own name, riding on a hiss of static, echoing through emptiness. And I know, in the deepest part of me, there will always be out there, somewhere, waiting for the next time I drive alone into the dark. The call came into the radio just after the distorted voices had stopped, though not really. Even when the radio went silent, the hiss of static lingered in my ears, like a warning I couldn't shake. Dispatch had received a report about a car left abandoned on the old hollow road. Nothing else. No explanation, no witness. But something about it didn't sit right with me. Old Hollow Road was remote, winding through forested hills, and its history was littered with stories people only whispered about. Accidents, disappearances, strange sounds at night. I tried to shrug it off, told myself those were just stories. But I'd been driving long enough to know that stories exist for a reason. I turned onto the narrow dirt path, headlights cutting through the trees like knives. The fog from earlier had returned, rolling low over the road, curling around my tires. The silence was thick, almost unnatural. I could hear my own engine, my own breathing, but nothing else until I passed the first curve and saw it. A car, dark, abandoned, its lights off, doors closed, but not locked. It sat oddly, angled as if it had veered off the road in a hurry. I slowed, heart thumping, every instinct on edge. The night felt heavier here, pressing down from the treetops. Something about the way the fog wrapped around the vehicle, muting its edges, made it feel unreal. I stepped out, flashlight in hand. The mud under my boots was soft, sticky. I circled the car slowly, sweeping the beam over the tires, the doors, the windows. No one inside, no movement. Just the smell, metal, damp upholstery, and something faintly acidic I couldn't place. Then I saw it, a scuff in the dirt, near the driver's side door. Fresh. Someone had been dragged or stumbled through the mud. I followed the marks, heart hammering, deeper into the woods. The footprints were erratic, not smooth or confident, and then they ended, abruptly, just stopped. I froze. My pulse raced. I whispered to myself, trying to stay rational. Maybe they ran. Maybe they found another path. But even as I said it, I knew something was wrong. Footprints didn't just vanish like that, not in soft mud. not in still air. I glance around. The trees press close, black silhouettes through the fog. Every branch seemed to twitch. Every shadow quivered at the edge of my vision. And then I heard it, soft, almost beneath hearing. Whispers. I spun, flashlight sweeping the woods. Nothing. The fog thickened, wrapping around the trees, blurring shapes into shadows. The whispers persisted, incoherent, teasing, as if the forest itself was speaking to me. They didn't make sense, but they were close. Closer than the trees should allow. I tried the radio again. Nothing. Static. That same low hiss that had haunted me since the last call. My fingers tightened around the flashlight. My stomach twisted. Something wasn't right. Not the car, not the footprints, not the silence. I followed the trail back to the road, scanning every shadow, every tree line. There were marks on the mud, deep gouges, as if someone fought, scratched at the ground, clawed for something. And yet no body, no signs of life at all, just the impressions left behind, like echoes of a struggle. I swallowed, forcing myself to speak aloud, to anchor myself. Okay, check the car. Check the car. Nothing, nothing. But my own words sounded hollow, swallowed by the fog and the trees. Then movement. Out corner of my eye, a shadow shifted behind a large oak. I swung the flashlight. Nothing. My pulse spiked, fingers tightening. The fog curled around the tree like smoke, and for a moment, I could swear the shadow had been human, watching me, waiting. I circled the car again, trying to keep calm. That's when I noticed the scratches on the paint. Long, deep, erratic. The door handle had been bent slightly. Something had been inside. Something had fought. And then nothing. No signs of struggle beyond that. Just an abandoned vehicle and a forest that seemed to breathe around me. I called out, "Anyone here? This is Deputy." My voice faltered, swallowed immediately by the fog. Silence answered. The whispers returned, closer now, like voices floating just beyond comprehension. Words I couldn't understand, syllables stretched and warped. I felt my stomach twist. The sense of being watched intensified. Every tree looked alive. Every shadow seemed to lean toward me, reaching, curling. My flashlight flickered, briefly plunging me into darkness before returning. And in that moment, I thought I saw it, a figure, fleeting dark, disappear behind the car before my eyes could focus. I swallowed hard, hands shaking. Rationality kept me moving. I had a job. I had a duty. I had to check the car. But the longer I stayed, the more the forest seemed to shift, subtly, unnaturally. Paths that had been clear just seconds ago now seemed to twist. Shadows moved in ways they shouldn't. The whispers circled, echoing, brushing my ears, teasing. I opened the driver's side door. The interior smelled faintly of decay, of something dead that hadn't been there before. The seatbelt was unbuckled, twisted, as if someone had fled in a hurry. Papers scattered across the floor. No personal items. No sign of where the driver had gone. Only the unsettling emptiness. I checked the passenger side. Same story. Nothing. Not even footprints leaving the car. My stomach clenched. Whoever had been here, if anyone, was gone without a trace, like they had evaporated into the night. I stepped back, breathing heavily, flashlight sweeping the trees. And then I heard it again, a whisper closer, urgent, almost human. My head spun. The fog seemed to tighten around me. Every instinct screamed to leave, but my feet stayed rooted. I felt drawn toward the shadows, toward the space between the trees, toward the whispers that licked at my mind. I moved cautiously, following the faint trail leading into the woods behind the car. Mud clung to my boots, and the fog was thick enough that my flashlight barely reached 2 feet ahead. Footprints. No, not footprints. Disturbances in the earth. Scratches. Depressions where someone's hands might have pressed into the ground. The trail was erratic, stopping and starting, circling, doubling back. Nothing made sense. And then a sound, a low, trembling cry, soft, almost imperceptible. My stomach twisted. I called out, voice hoarse, "Hey, are you okay?" No response. The cry didn't repeat. It faded, swallowed by the fog and trees. But the sense of dread lingered, wrapping tighter around me, heavier with every breath. I tried to rationalize. Maybe it was an animal. Maybe my mind was playing tricks. But the scratches on the car, the marks in the mud, the whispers, they were real. Something had been here. Something had fought. Something had vanished. I turned back toward the patrol car. I needed distance, safety, reason. But the road back didn't look the same. Shapes in the fog shifted. Shadows stretched and contracted. The whispers circled me now, teasing, almost laughing. My flashlight flickered again, and I thought I saw figures, glimpsed in the mist, retreating as I blinked. I got to the car, hands shaking, heart hammering. I sat inside, locked the doors, radio still hissing static, and tried to steady my breathing. Outside, the fog rolled over the road, swallowing the car, swallowing the trees, swallowing everything. I could still hear the whispers, faint, teasing, patient. I knew I should call for backup, tell dispatch what I had seen, but my voice wouldn't come. The fear had rooted itself too deep. The forest had left its mark on me, its presence etched into my mind. Something had been here. Something had been close. And though I couldn't see it, I could feel it lingering, patient, waiting. Even now, thinking about that night, I can feel the chill of the fog, the scratches on the car, the way the whispers tease me from just beyond comprehension. The forest on Old Hollow Road isn't empty. And whatever was there that night, it didn't leave. It never leaves. The night was thicker than usual, a darkness that seemed to soak into the car itself. I was driving along Old Hollow Road again, the same stretch of pavement that had been empty hours ago, but still haunted by the radio static and the abandoned car. The fog had returned, curling around the edges of the headlights, softening the trees into massive black shapes that felt almost alive. My hands gripped the wheel tighter than I realized, knuckles white, every nerve on alert. It started with a glint, subtle at first, caught in the edge of my vision. I thought it was a reflection, a shard of moonlight hitting the wet asphalt or a gleam from a deer's eye. But the moment I focused, it disappeared. I shook my head, trying to push the fear back, telling myself it was exhaustion, paranoia, the fatigue that came with this shift. I had seen too much for one night. Then I saw them, pairs of glowing eyes, scattered along the roadside, hidden in the shadows. Not one pair, not two, many, a dozen, maybe more, shifting slightly with the fog. They didn't blink, didn't move in a natural way. They just watched. I froze, gripping the wheel so tightly my hands hurt. My mouth went dry. My mind tried to reason. Animals, I told myself. Probably deer. Eyes reflecting my headlights. Rational, explainable. But something about the way they held me, unblinking, patient, made that impossible. I flicked the high beams on and off, tried to catch a glimpse. The eyes were gone. Nothing. The roadside was empty. Or at least it looked empty. My pulse hammered. I tried to speak, to call dispatch, but my throat felt raw, dry, like the words would burn on the way out. I drove on, slowly, unwilling to stop. Every shadow now seemed like it was moving in time with the pairs of eyes, bending, stretching, shifting in impossible ways. I blinked hard, forcing myself to focus on the road, and when I opened my eyes, the same pairs of glowing eyes were there again in a different spot. They had moved, and they were closer. I forced myself to breathe, shallow, fast. Rational thoughts scrambled. I turned the car sharply to the left, then right, tried to shake them, or maybe to prove to myself that they weren't real. But the eyes didn't move as normal creatures would. They stayed where I saw them. Or worse, they followed me, even when I looked directly at one. It seemed to linger in the corner of my vision. The fog thickened, curling around the tires and the underbrush. My headlights barely reached 10 feet. The road seemed longer than it should be, twisting and stretching unnaturally. The pairs of eyes multiplied, appearing in the fog as if conjured, disappearing when I tried to focus, reappearing closer, sometimes behind me, sometimes along the roadside. I tried talking aloud, even though my own voice startled me. This isn't real. It's not real. It's just tired eyes, just a long night, just fatigue. But every rational thought slipped away as the road itself seemed to warp. trees bent strangely, silhouettes moving in ways they shouldn't. And through it all, the eyes stayed patient, silent, unblinking. My pulse raced. I forced my hands to unclench the wheel slightly, but my arms were rigid. I tried looking away, staring at the foggy road ahead, and when I glanced back at the side mirrors, I saw eyes there too, hundreds, maybe thousands, glowing faintly in the darkness, reflecting nothing but intent. It was as if they were inside the night itself, peering at me, measuring me. I slowed the car, my mind teetering on the edge of panic. I wanted to stop, get out, run, anything, but the instinct of survival kept me driving. Keep moving, I told myself. Don't let them catch you. Don't let yourself think about what they are. Keep moving. Then I heard a sound. Not a growl, not a whisper. Something softer, closer, almost human. Footsteps? I spun the car to shine the headlights into the woods. Nothing. Only fog curling around blackened trees. But the sound persisted, echoing faintly, perfectly in rhythm with my own heartbeat. It wasn't outside. It was inside. Or at least it felt like it. I tried the radio again. Static, distorted, warped voices that didn't say my name this time, but hummed in a low, toneless pitch. The sound pressed against my skull, vibrating through my teeth, twisting my sense of balance. I could feel the eyes everywhere now. Hundreds of tiny points of light moving along the edges of perception, never fully visible but always present. My vision started to fracture. Shadows stretched unnaturally. The road seemed to elongate, folding in on itself. One moment I was passing a tree. The next I felt as if I hadn't moved at all. I blinked hard, trying to reset my mind. But when I opened my eyes, the eyes had changed. Some were familiar. I could swear they belonged to people I'd seen before, or at least to what I thought were people. Others were alien, elongated, unnatural, like the darkness had its own creatures, formed from the fog itself. And all of them were watching, waiting, patient. I whispered to myself, voice shaking. This isn't real. None of this is real. The words sounded hollow even as I said them. But deep down, I knew they were real. Not physical, maybe not human, but real enough to be terrifying. Real enough to make my hands shake and my mind scream for escape. I kept driving, headlights slicing through the fog, scanning constantly, hoping to reach a clearing, a break in the trees, anything that would remind me of the normal world. But the road didn't end, or at least it felt that way. Each curve revealed more eyes, more shapes, more subtle distortions in the world. Then one pair moved differently, slower, closer, a faint glow, almost white, reflecting from what looked like a thin, elongated face. My chest constricted. I blinked, and it was gone. But the sense of presence lingered, like a weight pressing against my ribs. My pulse thundered in my ears, and I knew I couldn't escape by speed alone. The fog thickened suddenly, swallowing the headlights. Panic clawed at me, but I forced the car forward. Every step felt wrong, as if the road was resisting me, as if it wanted me to see what was really there. Shadows lengthened, twisted, folded in on themselves, and always at the edges, eyes, watching, following, judging. I tried to count them, as if that would ground me. 1, 2, 3, 20, 50, hundreds. My mind failed. The more I tried to focus, the more they multiplied, stretching into the distance, hiding in the fog. And then, the worst part, when I looked directly at them, they moved. When I turned my head, they followed. No matter which way I looked, they were always there, lingering in my vision, just at the edge of recognition. Not blind, not random, intentional. I forced my breathing, forcing myself to drive, focusing only on the road immediately ahead. My hands shook. My throat burned. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to leave the car, to abandon the road entirely. But the headlights only revealed the same stretch of twisted, fog-drenched asphalt. I thought about last week, about the missing man, Ben, about the abandoned car, about the radio static. And suddenly, it all made sense in the wrong way. This wasn't random. This wasn't fatigue. Something was orchestrating it, bending the world just enough to make me see it. to make me feel it, to make me doubt reality itself. I could feel my mind cracking, each heartbeat stretching time, each blink elongating the shadows, the pairs of eyes, the shifting shapes, the whispers through the fog. They were fracturing my perception one slow, deliberate piece at a time. I was alone, but I wasn't alone. Not really. I gripped the wheel tighter, knuckles white, driving with rigid focus, ignoring the instinct to scream. My headlights caught movement again, something slinking along the roadside, too fast, too unnatural. I blinked. Gone. Only the fog curling, twisting in the faint, ghostly glow of eyes, watching patient. Hours felt like minutes, and minutes like hours. I drove, hoping, praying for some sign of normality, some end to the road, some familiar landmark. But the eyes didn't vanish. They only multiplied, flickering just out of reach, like stars in a stormy night sky. Impossible to touch, impossible to ignore. By the time I reached the clearing, pale moonlight cutting through fog, the first hints of dawn, the eyes were gone. Or maybe I had gone too long without sleep, and my mind had finally broken enough to stop seeing them. But I knew better. I knew they were still there, waiting in the shadows and the fog, in the cracks of reality that no one else could see. And I knew that when I returned, they would still be there, watching, following, patient. I didn't notice at first. The road seemed longer than usual. Curves that should have ended minutes ago stretched on, twisting in ways that felt impossible. The headlights cut a pale tunnel through the fog, and yet, even as I drove, familiar markers didn't appear where they should. The trees lining Old Hollow Road felt taller, closer, bending in strange angles, as if they were leaning toward me, pressing me into the asphalt. My pulse quickened. Something wasn't right. I reached for the radio, my fingers trembling. Dispatch! Dispatch! Coming. My voice sounded small in the cabin of the car, swallowed immediately by the hum of static. The screen on the radio blinked once, then died completely. Dead. No hiss, no buzz, nothing. Just silence. I frowned, fiddling with the dials. Nothing. I pounded the side, cursed, but it stayed dark. My backup plan, the GPS, was no better. The screen glitched, then displayed nothing but a pale, featureless line for the road. No roads branching off, no map. Nothing. It was like the world outside the car had evaporated, leaving only this endless stretch of asphalt, fog, and trees. I swallowed hard, gripping the wheel tightly. Rational thoughts kept trying to poke through the fog of panic. Maybe the devices were broken. Maybe the stretch of road was cursed with bad signal. Maybe someone had tampered with the equipment. But even as I thought it, I knew my instincts were screaming at me. This wasn't malfunction. This was something else. Something unnatural. I slowed the car to a crawl, scanning the road ahead. The fog was thick now, crawling along the asphalt like water, curling around my tires. Shapes appeared and disappeared at the edge of my headlights. Shadows, maybe, or something more. My mind refused to settle on explanations. Every time I blinked, the road seemed to stretch farther, curves extending beyond what memory should allow. I tried the radio again. Nothing. Static. Just a low, oppressive hum. I banged the dashboard, cursed under my breath. My chest was tight, every nerve screaming at me. I tried my phone. No signal. Of course. Nothing. Not even a faint bar. My pulse thumped in my ears, loud enough that I could hear it over the car. And then I noticed it. The road markings, white lines painted at regular intervals, were repeating. Every time I passed one, I thought, this must be the next one. But it wasn't. The same mark appeared again, just ahead, then again, then again. I swerved slightly, try and keep count, to measure distance. But the markings mocked me, infinite, looping, impossible. My breathing was shallow. I tried to calm myself. It's just the fog. It's just exhaustion. You're tired. You've been driving all night. But the rational voice in my head felt distant, weak. The fear was stronger, real, present. And it wasn't just fear, it was awareness. A creeping certainty that the road itself was alive, stretching, twisting, and reshaping itself to trap me. I slowed further. The tires crunch against gravel, and dirt that seemed to appear out of nowhere. The trees leaned closer, the fog wrapping them into solid shapes that moved just slightly, subtly. At first, I thought it was a wind, but the branches swayed in impossible ways, moving against the air, against logic, as if the forest was breathing around me, watching me. I reached the door handle to roll down the window and see if the night air could ground me. My hands trembled and I stopped mid-motion. The shadows at the edge of the headlights. They were moving again. Figures? Animals? I couldn't tell. They didn't run. They didn't react to the car. They only shifted. Just enough to remain out of reach. Just enough to let me know they were aware of me. I forced myself to breathe. In, out, slow. Keep control. Keep moving. But my eyes betrayed me. The road ahead seemed to tilt upward, folding on itself. A curve I had passed minutes ago appeared again, trees and fog identical. Panic bubbled in my chest. I tried to shake it off. Surely, it was just my mind playing tricks after hours of patrol. Exhaustion mixing with fear from the radio static, the abandoned car, the eyes in the darkness. I tried to call out. Into the night, into the radio, even into the fog. Dispatch, come in. I need. My voice cracked, swallowed by the heavy air. Nothing responded, not even the wind. Only silence and the faint sensation that I was being observed. I pressed the accelerator. The tires screamed against the asphalt, but the road didn't shorten. Each mile I drove seemed to stretch longer than the last. Panic started to take hold, a cold grip around my chest. My pulse thundered. I realized I hadn't passed a single house or landmark in what felt like hours. And yet, the fog and the road were perfectly familiar, like I had been there before, again and again, in a dream I couldn't wake from. I tried to focus on something tangible, something human. My breathing, my hands, the seat beneath me. But the mind plays cruel tricks when fear is left unchecked. Shapes flitted at the edge of vision. Shadows just beyond the fog, moving in ways that made no sense. Eyes? I thought I saw eyes. Pairs, glowing faintly, hidden in the underbrush, tracking me. Always tracking, always waiting. I slammed the brakes once hard, and the car skidded on wet asphalt. My hands shook violently. My chest ached. I stared into the fog, trying to locate anything solid, anything real, and then I heard it, a faint whisper, just a breath, a syllable, maybe my name. I froze, my ears strained. The fog seemed to pulse around me, moving with the whisper. I called out, voice hoarse. Who's there? My words were swallowed immediately by the fog, returned to me only as an echo distorted, wrong, almost mocking. I hit the horn. Nothing. Only fog. Only silence. Only the stretching, twisting road. I forced myself to drive again. Forward. Backward. Left. Right. Every turn led me to the same stretch, the same curve, the same trees. It was endless. I tried to measure, to mark, to map, but my attempts failed. Every tree, every bend, every shadow was the same. Familiar. Wrong. I tried to reason. Surely, this was a trick of the mind. Fatigue, stress, fear, isolation. But the rational voice had gone. All that remained was the awareness that something beyond comprehension was manipulating the night. Something patient, something old, watching me. I caught glimpses of the edge of the headlights, shapes moving slowly, always just outside focus. Shadows stretching along the road, following, shifting, fading, only to appear elsewhere. They didn't approach, but they didn't need to. Their presence was enough to fracture my mind, to warp reality around me. The road markers repeated again. The asphalt seemed to ripple, the fog curling thicker, and I realized with a sinking certainty that I lost all sense of distance and time. The night wasn't ending. The road wasn't ending. And I was trapped in a loop, moving, always moving, but going nowhere. I tried to calm myself. But the panic was climbing until it pressed against my rib cage. I could feel every heartbeat, every breath, every muscle tense against the impossible night. I tried to turn around. The wheel turned. The car shifted. But the same stretch of road appeared ahead. I was driving in circles. Or maybe The circles were infinite. I wanted to scream. I wanted to abandon the car, to run, to do anything. But the fog, the trees, the stretching road, they wouldn't let me. The world outside the headlights was no longer real. I could feel it. The road was bending, folding, infinite. A trap constructed by something patient, something aware. The whispers returned, more insistent now. Circling the car, coming from all directions. They weren't words, not language, just sound that felt human enough to terrify me. They slid into my mind, pressing, nudging, teasing, warning. I covered my ears, but the sound was inside, beneath my skull, vibrating, reshaping reality around me. Hours, minutes, seconds. I couldn't measure them anymore. The road stretched endlessly. The headlights flickered. Shapes moved in the fog. Whispers pressed into my mind. And I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that this was not a place bound by normal rules. Time, distance, reason, they had all been stripped away. I was lost, truly impossibly lost. I gripped the wheel, knuckles raw. I whispered to myself, a promise, a plea, a prayer. Keep moving. Just keep moving. Don't stop. Don't give in. But even as I spoke, I could feel the edges of my mind fraying. The road, the fog, the night, they were alive. They were waiting. And I was not alone. The headlights revealed nothing. The road repeated endlessly. And I drove, and I drove, and I knew I would keep driving, because stopping was unthinkable, impossible, and yet somehow inevitable. I was assigned patrol a road I hadn't even known existed. At least, I thought I hadn't. The locals called it Old Cedar Pass, but I'd never needed to drive that far before. It was the kind of road that disappears into nothingness if you blink, the asphalt cracking under the weight of forgotten years, the edges blending into the overgrown woods like the forest was trying to swallow it whole. I wasn't sure if anyone even used it anymore. My supervisor had said it was routine, and in law enforcement, routine is just a word we tell ourselves to keep calm when nothing about the job is calm. The first thing that struck me was the silence. Not the ordinary quiet you get in small towns. No traffic, no barking dogs, no children on bikes. This was deeper. It pressed against the car, heavy and patient. Like the air itself was holding its breath, waiting for me to notice it. My headlights cut through it in a narrow slice, illuminating gnarled roots and fallen leaves that glistened wet under the dim autumn sky. I hadn't gone more than 2 miles when I saw it. A massive tree had fallen across the road, its trunk splitting the asphalt like it had been trying to tear the road apart. I killed the engine and sat there just staring, because the thing that hit me first wasn't the tree itself, but the feeling like I had been here before. I don't mean vaguely, like you drive a route in the past. I mean in a dream that hadn't felt like a dream at the time, where I'd seen this exact tree, this exact split in the road, the same dim sky above. My stomach knotted, my hands tightening on the wheel. I tried to remember the dream more clearly, but it kept slipping away, like water through a sieve. The leaves on the tree glistened with an unnatural wetness, and the bark looked older than anything I had ever seen, old enough to belong to centuries. I felt my pulse quicken, the kind that makes your chest ache even before fear fully sets in. I stepped out of the car, the air biting my skin immediately. It smelled like wet earth and decay, but there was something underneath that, a faint metallic tang, like old blood. I circled the fallen tree slowly, flashlight cutting across moss and broken branches. And that's when I noticed the markings. Scratches. Deep, jagged lines along the trunk, almost like someone or something had tried to climb it or carve into it. My brain fought to rationalize it. Maybe a hiker, maybe lightning. But the scratches were precise, deliberate, almost human. The row beyond the tree seemed to shimmer. I know it sounds stupid, like a trick of light, but it wasn't. Every time I glanced past the trunk, the road stretched further than it should, curving and bending as if it were alive. My rational mind told me to call it in, log it as blocked, and head back. But curiosity, or maybe stupidity, pushed me forward. I squeezed past the trunk, ducking under a low branch that scraped my jacket. The air grew colder with every step. The crunch of leaves under my boots sounded too loud, echoing to the woods as though someone or something was listening. The farther I went, the more familiar it all felt. not familiar in a real-world way, but like that dream again. My chest tightened, not with exertion, but with a creeping, unnameable dread. I reached a curve where the trees arched over the road, forming a tunnel of dark green that blocked out the sky. And then it hit me. This was it. This was the stretch I had seen in the dream, exactly as it was. My own heartbeat was loud in my ears, a drum of warning. And yet, the most terrifying part wasn't the familiarity. It was the memory of something missing. I couldn't place it, but something wasn't supposed to be there. Something wasn't supposed to exist. The road dipped slightly, and I saw the first of them. Footprints. Not fresh, but not entirely old either. They pressed into the soft earth alongside the asphalt. Too deep for someone just walking. And they were all the same size. Small. Child size. But there was nothing else. No person. No backpack. No signs of struggle. Just the prints, stretching ahead like a trail, leading me somewhere I didn't want to go. I wanted to turn back. I wanted to call for backup, to rationalize this all away as some trick of the light or my imagination. But my feet kept moving. Step by step, I followed the prints, the air growing colder with every pace, like the forest was inhaling my warmth, my presence, trying to pull me deeper. And that's when I saw it. A house. Or maybe it wasn't a house. I can't really explain. It was small like a cabin, but it didn't belong here. The road should have curved miles before this point. And yet, there it was, sitting quietly, windows black and reflecting nothing. I stopped, my stomach curling with unease. The air smelled stronger now. Decay, rust, something old and metallic. I stepped closer, drawn by some instinct I can't explain. The kind that whispers you need to see this even when every fiber of your body screams to run. The door was slightly ajar, swaying in the wind with a groan that sounded almost like a sigh. I reached out to push it open, hesitating only a fraction of a second, but that half second was enough. Something moved inside. Something small, quick, just out of sight, but enough to make my skin crawl. I stumbled back, heart hammering, hands trembling. The footprints. They were leading me here. They hadn't been random. And I realized, with a shiver that went straight to my spine, that I had been here before. Not the physical location, but this feeling, this sense of inevitability, like the forest had been waiting for me, like it had carved this path in my memory long before I knew I would walk it. I wanted to leave, but I couldn't. The forest had a weight now, pressing down, holding me in place, whispering that I was part of something bigger than I could understand. The shadows under the trees stretched, moving as if alive. And in the distance, I swore I heard a child laughing. Or maybe it was me, echoing in my own mind. I turned to go, but the road behind me had changed. The fallen tree was gone. The asphalt stretched endlessly, twisting and folding in ways that made my stomach lurch. I realized suddenly that I had never left. I had never actually passed a blockage. I was trapped in a loop, a memory or a dream or something worse. And the forest was watching, patient, ancient, knowing. I don't remember how long I stood there. I don't know if it was minutes, hours, or something outside time altogether. But when I finally forced myself to move, the footprints had vanished. The house, too. And the road, God, the road was just a road again. Normal, cracked, empty, like nothing had ever happened. But I knew better. I could still feel it in my chest, the weight of those woods, the memory of a place I shouldn't have seen, and the certainty that it was waiting, that it would be waiting the next time I drove that road. And I would be there again, because I had been there before. And the forest never forgets. The sun had dipped low, brushing the sky with bruised shades of orange and purple when I started driving again. I thought the first encounter on Old Cedar Pass had been some kind of dream, or a trick my mind had played after sitting alone in a patrol car too long. But the deeper I went, the less I believed in reason. The road stretched out in front of me, darkening under a sky that felt too heavy, too slow. I tried to keep track of where I was going, but everything began to warp. The trees shifted in ways that made the road seem longer or shorter, depending on the angle I looked. Shadows slid along the asphalt, not like natural shadows, but like they had a mind of their own, following me, stretching and twisting, retreating when I turned my head too quickly. My hands tightened on the wheel. I told myself I was imagining things, that I was tired, that maybe the caffeine from my thermos hadn't fully kicked in. That's when the landmarks started changing. At first, it was small things. A mailbox that I was sure had been red yesterday was now green. A bend in the road I remembered being sharp was gentle, almost non-existent. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, and looked again, thinking maybe it was a fading light. But it wasn't. It wasn't fading. It was different. A sign appeared ahead. Its white letters glowed faintly in the darkening light. Harrington Road. I frowned. That wasn't on any map I had ever seen. I swerved slightly, scanning the trees for anything familiar, but nothing matched. The road I knew should have intersected a small creek just past the bend, but the creek wasn't there. The road curved instead, smooth and empty, lined with trees that felt just a little too close together. I tried to call it in, thinking someone might have altered the signs, maybe a prankster or local kids, but my radio crackled only with static. I flipped switches, pounded on the microphone, anything to get some reassurance that I was still in the real world. Nothing, just static. The next landmark was a gas station, or at least it looked like one. A single pump under a flickering light. The building was low and rectangular, the paint peeling like it had been abandoned for years. I thought, for a second, I remembered passing before, but the memories were wrong. I had never seen this gas station on Cedar Pass, or anywhere else, and yet I felt like I had. I felt the memory in my chest like a weight pressing down. I slowed the car, heart hammering, and checked the odometer. Miles passed differently here. I had been driving for nearly half an hour, or maybe an hour. Time didn't feel right anymore. The odometer didn't make sense. I could feel my pulse in my temples. Then the houses began to vanish. 1 minute, there would be a small wooden cabin tucked behind trees. The next, the cabin would be gone, and in its place, a stretch of empty woods, completely unbroken. I blinked twice. Each time I opened my eyes, the landmarks had shifted slightly, like the road itself was breathing. I tried to remember where I had seen something like this. Dreams, yes, movies, books, but nothing prepared me for the reality of it. A crooked fence I had passed just a moment ago was now a neat row of hedges. A familiar bend in the road had disappeared entirely, replaced with a straight stretched line with unfamiliar signs. Speaking of signs, they got worse. They became impossible. Eldridge Avenue, Black Hollow Lane, Wrenwood Drive. Names that didn't exist. Names that I had never seen on a map. And every time I tried to memorize them, try to retrace my steps, the signs would vanish. Or change. I tried to take pictures with my phone, to prove to myself I wasn't losing my mind. Each time I did, the images were blurred or empty. A sign in real life would show clearly on the road, but the photo would show only blackness or the faint outline of trees. No road, no sign, nothing. At some point, I realized I wasn't just losing the landmarks. I was losing the road itself. 1 minute, asphalt under my tires. The next, a thin ribbon of dirt and gravel, like someone had stitched a path to the forest overnight. The wheel wobbled, my stomach twisting. I wanted to stop, to pull over, to breathe, but there was nowhere to stop. The shoulder was gone. The forest pressed close to the tires. I started keeping a mental map, noting trees, branches, fallen logs, anything permanent. But the forest didn't obey permanence. A tree I swore had been on the right was now on the left. Branches I passed under suddenly loomed overhead like dark, grasping fingers. My hands were clammy, my chest tight. I wanted to scream, but I kept it quiet because my voice sounded wrong, hollow, swallowed by the woods. The strangest part was the feeling of familiarity. Every twist, every turn, every vanished or altered landmark carried a sense of deja vu, like I had been driving this road 1,000 times, yet never remembered it fully. I began to doubt everything I knew about myself. I didn't just feel lost on a road. I felt lost inside my own memories, in my own mind. At one point, I passed a small white chapel, perfectly intact, its windows glowing faintly. I remembered it vividly. I remembered standing in front of it once, years ago, when I was younger, thinking it looked abandoned. But that memory, That memory was impossible. I had never been here, and yet I felt the cold bite of nostalgia, sharp and confusing, as if the chapel had existed in my mind long before I saw in reality. I reached a curve where a familiar stream should have crossed the road. It was gone, replaced by a low hill, dotted with wildflowers I didn't recognize. I slowed, heart hammering. The radio crackled again, faintly this time. A voice, whispering? I couldn't tell. I leaned forward, straining to hear, but it cut out. Only the hiss of static remained. By then, I had stopped trying to map it logically. The road was no longer Cedar Pass. The landmarks weren't landmarks. The world itself had shifted, folding in on itself, bending like I was trapped inside someone else's memory, someone else's dream. And the worst part, I felt watched, not by a person, not by an animal, by the road, by the forest, by something patient, ancient, and cruel. I passed a house, or maybe it was a cabin, low and wide, with peeling white paint. I remembered it clearly. The door was open, dark inside, and I realized that it was always there, waiting, like all the other impossible places. They weren't random. They were deliberate. The forest had a pattern, and I was inside it. I tried to turn back, to retrace my path, but the road twisted in ways that made it impossible. Every turn I remembered taking led somewhere unfamiliar. Every landmark I thought I recognized had changed. And every sign, every building, every tree felt like a trap. A message. I couldn't read it, but I felt its meaning pressing into my chest. By the time night fell fully, the sky was black and featureless. The road ahead disappeared into darkness. No headlights could reach far enough. And in that darkness, I saw glimpses. Shadows moving where nothing should be. Glowing eyes, faintly, for just a moment before disappearing. Shapes that melted into the trees when I blinked. I stopped the car. Sat there, heart racing, pulse hammering. My hand shook on the wheel, and I realized I didn't know where I was. Not just on a road, but in the world itself. Because the road had vanished. The landmarks had vanished. And I was left with only the memory that I had driven this path before. I had always driven it before. And I would drive it again. I don't know how long I sat there, or how long I had been driving in this endless loop. Time didn't exist here. Only the road that disappeared, the landmarks that lied, and the knowledge that the forest was waiting for me to move, to choose. And I knew somehow that it didn't matter which way I turned. It would find me, always. I wasn't sure why I slowed down. I shouldn't have. Every instinct told me to keep moving, to drive past whatever the road had decided to throw at me this time. But something made me hit the brakes. A figure was standing at the side of the road. At first, I thought it was a person lost, maybe a traveler or someone who had wandered off the main route. The figure was tall, hunched slightly, dressed in dark clothing that blended with the shadows of the trees. I couldn't make out a face. The headlights only caught glimmers of wet mud on boots, a sleeve that flickered like it belonged to someone very small or very old. I didn't feel relief. I felt that same creeping dread I'd felt since the first mile of Cedar Pass. I rolled down the window. "Hey, need a ride?" My voice sounded hollow, swallowed by the heavy air. The figure didn't answer, didn't move, didn't even turn toward me. Just stood there, still like it was waiting. I squinted, leaning forward, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The air around it shimmered slightly. Heat rising, or maybe something else. Something unnatural. I unlocked the doors and stepped out. My boots crunched on the gravel shoulder. Every instinct screamed at me to get back in the car, to drive away. But I was rooted to the spot, drawn forward by curiosity or something darker. "Hello?" My voice was steadier this time, though my chest was tight and my hands trembled. The forest around me was silent. No wind, no rustle, only the faint smell of wet dirt and decayed leaves. And then I noticed the footprints. They were fresh, deep impressions pressed into mud at the side of the road. Big, human, leading toward me. I realized I had stepped right into them, without noticing. My stomach knotted. The footprints weren't normal. They were too perfect, too deliberate, spaced with a rhythm that seemed like they were measuring my pace. I took a step closer to the figure, careful, slow, heart hammering in my chest. And then I blinked, just for a second, and it was gone. The figure wasn't there. Not a flicker. Not a shadow. Nothing. I spun around, searching. Tried to catch it moving between trees. Any sign that it hadn't just disappeared into the night. But the road was empty. The trees loomed, silent and dark. And the footprints ended right where the figure had been standing. I felt my stomach drop. My pulse spiked. I wanted to tell myself it was a trick of the light. Exhaustion, imagination. But something in the mud said otherwise. The prints were real. The pressure, the depth, the weight, they couldn't have been imagined. Something had been there. Something had stepped into the car in my memory and disappeared without leaving a body behind. I bent down, inspecting the mud. Each footprint was distinct, detailed. I could see the sole's pattern. Simple, unremarkable, yet precise. And then it hit me. There were no more footprints leading away. Just the ones that led to where it had been standing. The figure hadn't walked off. It had vanished. I swallowed hard and straightened up. The forest seemed closer now. The trees crowding in as if pressing their attention on me. My hands shook, but I forced myself to breathe. Rational thoughts collided with the knowledge that none of this made sense. This road, this forest, these impossible things, they weren't random. They were deliberate. Waiting, watching. I glanced back at my car. The door was still open. My mind argued with itself, telling me to get inside, to lock it, to drive until I was somewhere that made sense. But I couldn't bring myself to move. I felt trapped in a moment that wasn't just time, but something else, something stretching around me like a net. Another blink, and the headlights caught something moving in the distance. Not the figure. Something smaller, lighter, shifting to the trees like it was skimming across the surface of the ground. My pulse thumped violently. I tried to follow it with my eyes, but every time I looked, it vanished again, leaving only silence. I crouched near the footprints, tracing one with a trembling finger. The mud was cold, sticky, holding the shape like it was frozen in time. It felt wrong, alive almost, like it remembered the pressure of whoever or whatever had left it. I could feel it under my fingertips, a quiet weight pressing back, an echo of movement. I straightened, glancing down the road. The signs, the landmarks, all of it shifted again. A curve I remember being sharp now sloped gently, and the road seemed narrower, tighter. The forest pressing closer. I realized I had no idea which way I had come, or which way I should go. The silence was absolute. Even the distant hum of my car seemed to vanish. My radio crackled faintly, and I swore I heard a whisper, just one word, but I couldn't place it. My own name, or something else entirely. I strained to listen, but it was gone, leaving only the static that had haunted me since the first mile. I took a hesitant step forward. The footprints were still there, frozen in the mud. And then I noticed something else. Smaller impressions around them. Tiny, delicate shapes, almost childlike. They surrounded the larger footprints, like a circle, a pattern I couldn't understand. I bent down and looked closer, and a chill ran down my spine. They weren't human. Not really. They were wrong. The shapes of the toes, the spacing. It didn't belong to any person I had ever seen. I felt my throat tighten. My hands shook. I wanted to run, but I felt pinned, as if the air itself had weight and gravity. I realized, suddenly, that I had been here before. Not physically, but in memory, in something older, something buried. My pulse raced. Every instinct screamed that I should leave, but curiosity, or maybe fear itself, drew me forward. The road curved ahead. Faint headlights glimmered in the distance, but it wasn't my car. Another vehicle? Or was it a trick? My eyes strained against the darkness. I felt something shift behind me. Just at the edge of my vision, I spun, heart hammering, but nothing moved. The mud was silent. The forest was silent. Only the echo of my own breaths filled the space. And then I saw it again, a flash, a glimpse of movement just beyond the trees. A figure, fleeting, impossible. And I realized it had been following me. Or perhaps I had been following it. The footprints, the prints of something else, the strange pattern. They all led somewhere I wasn't meant to go. I stumbled back toward the car, fumbling for the door. My hands were slippery with sweat. My pulse had drummed my ears. The figure was gone again, leaving only the prints. Mud, cold and sticky, stubbornly holding the shape of someone, or something that should not exist. I slammed the door shut, locking it this time. I tried to start the engine, but the key turned sluggishly, as if the car itself resisted movement. When it finally caught, I hesitated, glancing in the rear-view mirror. The road behind me stretched endlessly, unbroken, unchanging, and yet I knew it had shifted. It had been waiting. I drove slowly at first, eyes darting to the edges of the road, to the trees. Every shadow felt alive, every glimmer of light a promise or a threat. I didn't dare look down at the footprints in the mirror. I knew they wouldn't be there when I glanced, but I could feel them, as if the mud itself remembered, as if the impression of that figure lingered in the air like smoke. By the time the forest thinned and the familiar glow of a streetlight ahead marked the end of Old Cedar Pass, I felt hollowed out, emptied of something I didn't know I carried. The road had been patient. It had waited for me to notice, and I had, but I knew it wasn't over. Not really. I had seen the footprints. I had seen the figure, and somewhere just beyond the trees, it was waiting for me to slow down again, to look, to blink, and disappear, leaving only traces in the mud for me to follow. I didn't want to stop. I didn't want to ever slow down again, because I had learned something that night. Some roads are patient, some figures never leave, and some prints, once made, are never really gone. I knew something was wrong the moment the turn came into view again. The same bend I had passed. No, the same exact bend I had passed an hour ago, maybe two, or maybe it had never been hours at all. My mind was fraying at the edges, trying to grasp something solid, some proof that time was still moving forward. But the road kept folding back on itself, looping like it had a memory, like it was laughing at me quietly, patiently, under the dense canopy of trees. The headlights painted long, wavering shadows across the cracked asphalt. Everything looked the same, but not quite. The trees leaned at slightly different angles. The leaves shone with a wetness that had never been there before, or maybe it had always been there, and I had never noticed. The forest seemed alive, breathing, pressing in close to the sides of the road, crowding me, waiting for me to notice that I was not in the world I thought I had left behind. I gripped the wheel harder, knuckles white, and tried to force myself to stay calm. My radio crackled again, just a faint, broken static, like whispers lost in the wind. It gave me nothing. No comfort, no answer, only the sense that I was utterly alone. I had always known solitude could be terrifying, but nothing had prepared me for a place that wasn't empty, but where I couldn't exist properly, where the rules of the world bent against me. Every turn I made brought me back to the same points. A cracked mailbox leaning at the same crooked angle, the same jagged roots curling over the shoulder of the road, the same moss-covered sign I had seen hours, or maybe days, before. I tried to mark the road, make small scratches in the paint on a guardrail, leave a pen or piece of paper. I tried to leave something tangible behind, so I could trace my progress. But every time I glanced back, every mark I thought I had made had vanished. The guardrail was smooth, the paint pristine, the world unwilling to keep my memory. Panic began to seep into my chest. Not sudden, explosive panic, but slow, creeping, like cold water filling my lungs. My pulse raced, but my hands felt heavy, slow, as if the force itself had tied them to the wheel. I tried to reason it out. Maybe exhaustion, maybe caffeine wearing off, maybe I had fallen asleep at some point and was dreaming the whole thing. But the road didn't respond to reason. The road had no care for rational thought. I tried to drive faster, to escape, to break the loop, but the road would not let me. No matter how fast I went, the bends returned. The same trees leaned over the asphalt. The same shadows stretched long and thin, mocking me with their repetition. I glanced at the odometer. It spun erratically, numbers jumping, refusing logic. Miles passed and rewound in a rhythm I could not comprehend. I realized then that time itself had warped here. The forest pressed closer. I could hear it, faintly, the rustle of leaves in a breeze I could not feel. Shadows shifted at the edges of my vision. Sometimes a flash of something dark and tall, moving behind the trees, just beyond reach. My heart thudded violently. but the glimpses were always gone when I tried to focus on them. I could not tell if it was real, if I was imagining it, or if it had always been there. I tried to remember how I had gotten here, how many hours had passed, how many times I had passed the same points. But the memory frayed like a rope under tension. I remembered the fallen tree, the house that had appeared and vanished, the footprints in the mud of the hitchhiker that wasn't there. Each memory was sharp, yet unreal, like something I had witnessed through someone else's eyes. And now, I realized with growing horror that none of it had prepared me for this. The road widened, narrowed, sloped, and curved all at once, bending in impossible ways. My stomach rolled with the unnatural angles. I tried to keep my hands on the wheel, to force myself to drive normally, but every instinct screamed that normal was gone. The air itself seemed thick, clinging, vibrated with a low hum that I couldn't place. The forest wasn't just around me anymore. It was above, below, pressing through the car, through the glass, through my skin. I thought I saw the figure again. Not the hitchhiker exactly, but something tall, moving at the edge of the headlights. I blinked and it was gone, but I could feel it. I could feel eyes, or something, following me from the dark, following me through the loops. And with every blink, every turn of the wheel, I felt smaller, like I was shrinking into the asphalt, into the mud, into the memory of this road. I screamed, but no sound came out. Or maybe it did, swallowed by the night, devoured by the unfeeling forest. I pounded on the horn, hoping someone or anything would hear me. But the echo returned only a hollow, empty sound, fading into nothingness, leaving me with a sensation that I was truly, utterly alone. The signs came next, familiar yet impossible. Black Hollow Lane, Eldritch Avenue, Wrenwood Drive. I had seen it before. I remember them vividly from the previous days or nights, but they led nowhere, twisting back onto themselves, folding into curves that shouldn't exist. Every landmark I had tried to rely on had vanished, rearranged, or warped beyond recognition. I realized I hadn't seen the sun in hours, maybe days. The sky was a featureless gray-black, a ceiling that pressed down on me. I tried to recall the last real thing I had seen, the patrol car, the tree, the house, but each memory was like sand slipping through fingers. Even recalling them made me nauseous, like I was swallowing something that didn't belong inside me. I tried to stop, to park the car, to take stock of my surroundings. But the shoulder was gone, swallowed by trees that leaned closer, twisting impossibly, roots clawing toward the asphalt. I couldn't leave the car without stepping into the forest, and every step felt like crossing an invisible line I wasn't meant to cross. I began to notice small things, shadows that should not exist, moving independently of any light source, patterns in the trees that repeated too perfectly, almost like they were trying to communicate. The leaves glistened with wetness that hadn't been there a moment ago, and sometimes, just at the edge of perception, I thought I heard whispers. Soft, faint, unintelligible, but they're waiting. I tried the radio again. Static, then a faint click, a voice whisper my name, or a name I thought I remembered. My pulse slammed in my ears. I wanted to scream, to get out of the car, to run into the forest and find some point of reference. But something held me back, some invisible thread tying me to the wheel, to the road, to this endless loop. I drove. I had no choice but to drive. Every curve led me back to points I had already passed. Every mile, every tree, every sign was a mirror of the last. I realized with absolute clarity that I was trapped, not by anything physical, not by the forest, not by the road itself, but by the way the world here refused to move forward. Time, space, logic, they all folded back on themselves. The panic that started as creeping cold water now surged through me like fire. I pounded the steering wheel, screamed into the empty forest, my voice hoarse, cracking, swallowed immediately. My hands were slick with sweat, my heart racing in a rhythm I could not control. I realized that I had stopped thinking in sequences of cause and effect. There was no forward. There was only the loop, only the endless road, only the sense that I would drive forever, seeing the same bends, the same trees, the same impossible signs, until I forgot who I was. I tried to will myself to turn, to pick a random direction, anything. but the road twisted beneath the wheels, ignoring my choices. The asphalt stretched endlessly, folding back onto itself, curving impossibly, the lines painted on it glimmering in ways they shouldn't. Every instinct told me to stop, to give up, to surrender to the loop, but surrender didn't bring peace. It only brought awareness. The road knew, the forest knew, and it was patient. I realized then that my own mind was betraying me. Memories I thought I had, the route I had known, even my own name, they felt like fragile constructions ready to crumble. I didn't know if I had ever left a patrol car. I didn't know if the trees had always been there, or if they had grown around me while I wasn't looking. The forest had rewritten everything, including me, and in the rear view mirror, I thought I saw headlights. A car behind me? No, there was nothing there, just the illusion of something that should exist, but didn't. I blinked and it was gone. I realized then that it had never been a car, but a reflection of what I feared most. That I was not moving forward, not escaping, not surviving. I was trapped, and the road would not let me go. Hours, days, or minutes passed. I no longer knew which. My fuel gauge danced erratically. My odometer spun in impossible patterns. My mind tried to hold on to something real, anything, but the loop pressed down, insistent, patient, and cold. Every turn, every bend, every tree was the same. And yet, each repetition carried subtle differences, like the forest was testing me, watching me unravel. By the time the first hints of gray appeared in the distance, or maybe it was always there, I realized the truth. The road had no end. There was no escape. The world outside was unreal, a construct bending around me, waiting for me to forget everything but the road itself. Panic and isolation consumed me completely. I was alone, truly alone, and the road, endless and patient, stretched before me, looping, waiting, eternal. Because no matter how fast I drove, no matter how far I went, I would always come back. Always, and the road would be waiting. The night was quiet, the kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes you feel like you're underwater. I sat in the patrol car, engine off, radio crackling faintly with a low hum of static. Midnight, the town was asleep, or at least, I hoped it was. Patrols like mine were supposed to be routine. Quiet roads, empty streets, the occasional drunk wandering home. But something about this night felt different. It started with a call, not a normal dispatch, not a report of a lost dog or a minor traffic accident. This was urgent, raw, broken. The radio squawked, a voice screaming through the static, words jumbled, panic, fear, someone trapped deep in the woods, screaming, "Dispatch! This is Deputy Mills." I said, my voice steady, though my chest had tightened. "Please repeat. Identify location." Static, then the voice again, louder this time, clearer but frantic. "Please, someone help there." And then the signal cut out, leaving only the hiss of nothing. My stomach clenched. I knew those woods. Everyone in this town knew them. Dense, sprawling, old-growth forest that had swallowed more than a few people over the years. Hikers, hunters, curious kids. Some never came back. And now, someone was out there, screaming for help, alone, terrified. I grabbed my flashlight, checked my sidearm. The radio clipped to my shoulder. Everything felt heavier than normal. The keys in my hand weighed more. My heartbeat roared in my ears. I told myself I had done this before. I had walked into darkness, alone, called out names and threats and promises, and somehow walked back. But this night felt different. The kind of different that curls into your stomach and doesn't leave. The patrol car rumbled as I drove toward the edge of town, the engine cutting through the oppressive quiet. The streets were empty. Streetlights flickered like they were tired of standing guard. And then the trees began. Tall, black, pressing in on the narrow road. Shadows fell over the asphalt, moving with the wind, or maybe moving of their own accord. I parked at the forest's edge. My flashlight cut a thin line through the dark, illuminating nothing but leaves glistening with dew. The smell of wet earth and rotting foliage hit me immediately. I stepped out, the cold air biting at my skin. Each breath I took was sharp, heavy. I could hear my boots crunching leaves, my own heartbeat the faint whistle of wind weaving through the trees. I raise the radio. Dispatch, I'm going in. Request backup. No answer. Static. Only static. I cursed under my breath. Backup would take time. Time someone out there might not have. I stepped into the woods. The flashlight beam swung across twisted trunks and dense undergrowth. The darkness swallowed the edges, folding in on itself. Every step forward made the forest feel larger, deeper, as if I was stepping into a place that existed outside of normal space. My ears strained for sound, my nerves taut. And then I heard it, faint, barely audible over the wind. Screaming. Human. Terrified. Hello. My voice cracked, though I tried to make it steady. I'm a deputy who's out here. The scream cut off abruptly, leaving only the echo. My stomach tightened. Whoever it was, they were close. And yet not close, the way sound travels in these woods. You can be 20 feet away and feel miles apart. I kept moving, careful not to trip on the gnarled roots and uneven ground. Branches scraped my jacket. Leaves slapped my face. My flashlight flickered once, twice, and I swore I saw a shadow dart across the beam. My chest jumped, my breath quickened. I told myself it was nothing, just my eyes playing tricks. But the scream came again, closer this time, raw, desperate. Please, someone. The voice rasped, breaking into sobs. I felt my throat tighten. This wasn't a prank. This wasn't someone lost on a trail. This was terror, pure, naked fear. And I was the only one who could help. I pressed deeper into the forest. Roots caught my boots. Branches tore at my sleeves, but I didn't stop. The screaming cut off again, and a new sound took its place. Heavy breathing. Quick footsteps that weren't mine. I spun, flashlight swinging wildly. Nothing. Only the trees. Only shadows. Only that unbearable, suffocating quiet. The path narrowed. Fallen logs and tangled brush slowed me down. I had to climb over, duck under, stretch and strain. Every movement felt exaggerated, like the forest was stretching in response. Folding around me, I began to wonder if I was losing track of distance. If the forest itself had become a trap, a maze designed to unmoor me from reality. And then I saw it, a clearing, just faintly visible, dim moonlight filtering through the canopy. The screaming had stopped. Silence. Absolute, bone-deep silence. My flashlight illuminated a small circle of ground. Muddy footprints. Bare footprints. Leading in different directions as if someone or something had been running in circles, terrified, lost. I bent down, tracing them with a gloved hand. Cold, wet, human, and yet wrong. They seemed to shift slightly under my gaze, elongating, twisting, merging into one another. My stomach churned. I swallowed hard and tried to call out again. Are you here? Can you hear me? No answer. Only the leaves rustling, the wind whispering through branches, a sound almost like laughter or crying. I couldn't tell which. I stood frozen, chest heaving, tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. But the prints told a different story. Someone had been here, very recently, and now they weren't. I followed the prints, moving cautiously, flashlight beam swinging. Every step made me feel smaller, insignificant, swallowed by the forest. My own shadow stretched grotesquely across the undergrowth, twisting with the branches. And then the scream returned. Not far, but not near, just at the edge of perception, echoing from every direction at once. I stopped. My hands shook. My heart pounded in my throat. I tried to remember my training, my calm voice, my routines, but all I could think about was the terror in that scream, and the knowledge that whatever had made it was still out there, watching, waiting. I advanced slowly, scanning every tree, every shadow. The footprints led me deeper into the woods, the forest closing around me like walls of blackened stone. I stumbled once, fell against a tree, the bark scraping my face, my hands muddy. I forced myself up, breathing hard, sweat and cold battling my skin, and then I saw it. Not the person, not fully, just a flicker, a movement, something crouched in the shadows, small, human shaped, but wrong. Too still, too silent. eyes glinting faintly in the beam of my flashlight. I froze. My mind screamed at me to move, to run, to get back to the car, to call for help. But curiosity or duty or stubbornness pushed me forward. Hey, it's okay. I'm here to help. My voice cracked. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. And then, just like that, it vanished. I spun around, scanning the clearing. Nothing. No footprints leading away. No movement. The forest seemed to inhale around me, pressing in. My chest tightened. Panic gnawed at the edges of my mind. Every rational thought fled. I could feel the presence, whatever it was, closing in, patient and silent. I forced myself to breathe, trying to regain composure. My flashlight flickered again, and I noticed more prints, leading in a circle, surrounding me. I was in the center of something deliberate. I didn't know what, and I wasn't sure I wanted to. The radio crackled faintly. Static first, then a whisper. My own name? Maybe. Maybe not. I swallowed hard. The trees loomed, shadows stretching impossibly. My chest burned, and I realized I was trembling, alone, deep in the woods, with nothing between me and the darkness but a thin beam of light and the hope that whoever had screamed could still be saved. I took a step forward, flashlight trembling in my hands. I didn't know what I would find. I didn't know if I would find anything at all, only the cold, damp air, the smell of wet earth, and the echo of that scream still ringing in my ears. And somewhere just beyond the shadows, I felt it watching, waiting. I stumbled to the last stretch of trees, branches clawing at my jacket, roots grabbing at my boots. The screams had stopped. The voice that had pierced the static, torn through the night, was gone, and with it came a silence that weighed heavier than the darkness itself. I expected to see someone, some sign of life, some trace that my pursuit had meaning. But the clearing that opened before me was empty, not a footprint, not a tree knocked over, not even a broken branch. Nothing that indicated a struggle. It was perfect, undisturbed, almost unreal in its stillness. My flashlight trembled in my grip, the beam sweeping across the small circle of earth. The moonlight filtered through the trees, pale and indifferent, showing nothing out of place. I dropped to my knees, staring at the ground. My boots had left tracks in the mud, long, deep impressions from my frantic run through the forest. And that's when I noticed something. My footprints weren't just here. They weren't just my own. There was a second set, faint, overlapping the first. Smaller, lighter, human-shaped but wrong, uneven, like something had shifted mid-step, as if reality itself had stuttered under its weight. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath. Cold sweat ran down my temples, stinging my eyes. My heart was hammering. I scanned the clearing again, forcing myself to believe. It had to be some trick of the light, fatigue, stress. Maybe I'd imagined the scream entirely. But the prints, they were real, and they were mine. At least they looked like mine. I stood slowly, unease gnawing at me. The forest felt different, smaller. Somehow, the trees didn't lean in as aggressively as before. The oppressive closeness that had pressed on my shoulders while I ran seemed to have lifted, and yet I didn't feel relief. I felt erased, hollow, as if the forest had inhaled everything I brought into it. My fear, my presence, my memory. I followed my footprints back toward the edge of clearing. Step by step, I traced them, expecting to find my own path back. But something was off. The mud resisted. Where I expected to see the marks of my boots, there were gaps. Places where the impression should have been solid were faint, blurred, almost as if they had been smudged by an invisible hand. A chill ran through me. I bent down again, pressing a gloved finger into one of the deeper prints. Cold, sticky. I thought I could feel it pulse under my touch. Like the earth itself remembered the pressure of my steps. My reflection, or some shadow of it, stared back at me in the shiny surface of a shallow puddle. And for a moment my mind faltered. The reflection blinked before I did. I stumbled back. My breathing came in harsh, uneven bursts. My hands shook, my knees weak. I tried to reassure myself. It had to be exhaustion. Some trick of the mud, the moonlight, my mind on the edge of reason. but every instinct screamed otherwise. Something about this clearing, about these prints, about the emptiness, it was wrong in ways I couldn't name. I took a tentative step forward. Another. My boot sank slightly in the wet earth. The faint, overlapping footprints stretched ahead, deeper into the forest, leading somewhere I hadn't gone, somewhere I didn't want to go. And yet, my legs moved, carrying me forward without permission. My own body was betraying me, compelled by something older, stranger, and infinitely patient. The trees grew closer, the shadows longer. The silence pressed in from all sides. No wind, no rustle of leaves, no chirp of distant animals. Only the crunch of mud under my boots and the soft echo of my own heartbeat. My mind tried to reach for reason. There has to be someone here. A person, a trap, a prank, something. But each rational thought dissolved almost immediately, replaced by the primal knowledge that I was utterly, completely alone. And then I noticed it. My footprints. They weren't just leading away. They were vanishing. One step, and the deep impressions I had made were gone. The mud was smooth again, as if I had never walked here at all. I stopped, frozen. I spun in a slow circle, scanning the forest, every shadow, every tree. Nothing moved, nothing waited. Nothing existed besides me in the silent, watchful emptiness. Panic clawed at my chest. My throat tightened. I tried to call out, to yell into the trees, to demand an answer, but my voice was swallowed by the darkness. No echo, no response, just a sensation that the forest itself had absorbed my presence, leaving only the faintest imprint of existence behind. I stumbled forward again. The overlapping footprints reappeared ahead, leading deeper into the trees, into areas I had never explored, paths that didn't exist on any map I'd studied. I felt my stomach twist. My own steps carried me into the unknown, following traces that were mine yet not mine. The forest seemed to bend around me, reshaping as I moved, folding space and time into something I could not grasp. A faint sound brushed against my consciousness. Soft, almost imperceptible. Footsteps, not my own. Light, quick, moving just beyond the edge of the flashlight's beam. I froze. Every hair on my arm stood on end. My chest throbbed, my fingers tightening on the flashlight. Hello. My voice cracked, small and useless. The sound dissolved into the night. No answer, only the soft echo of something moving in the shadows. And then silence. Absolute. I forced myself to keep moving, driven by instinct, by a desperate need to understand what was happening. The footprints led me in slow spirals, doubling back on themselves, folding into circles I could not trace logically. Every step I took left me unsure whether I was progressing or trapped, moving forward or falling deeper into a loop I could not escape. The forest seemed to pulse around me. The shadows stretched unnaturally, bending toward me, away from me, existing in ways that defied reason. My reflection in the puddles along the path was fragmented, shattered by ripples, as if the water itself could not contain my image. And then I realized it wasn't just my reflection. Something else lingered there, moving just beneath the surface. A shape, dark, indistinct, humanoid, but wrong. I stumbled backward, tripping over a root. My flashlight swung wildly, the beam cutting across the forest in frantic arcs. For a moment, I saw it clearly. Something crouched in the mud, small, human-shaped, and yet impossible. Its eyes glimmered faintly, reflecting my own beam back at me. And then, just like that, it vanished. The clearing was empty again. The footprints ahead were gone. I was alone, completely, terrifyingly alone. I sank to my knees, shaking, the flashlight sliding across the mud. My own print surrounded me now in faint, blurred impressions. And then it hit me. I hadn't moved. I hadn't been moving. The footprints leading away weren't real. I hadn't walked them. The forest, the clearing, the shadows, they had all rewritten the evidence of my presence. I traced a fingertip along one of the impressions. The mud was cold, wet, unyielding, but it felt wrong, alive, almost, and I understood with a growing dread that the forest had replaced me. My footsteps were mine, but they weren't. My shape had existed briefly, and now it was gone. Or maybe I was gone. Or maybe I had never existed at all. I forced myself to stand, unsteady, chest tight, hands shaking. The forest was still. The shadows pressed in. My own heartbeat sounded loud, deafening. I looked down at the prints beneath my boots. They were fading, melting into the earth, leaving me with nothing. I walked in a small circle, scanning, listening. Nothing. The clearing was perfect, empty, silent. The sense of being watched pressed down on me, patient and immovable. Every instinct told me to run, to flee, to escape, to call out. But I had nowhere to go. The forest had swallowed everything I had brought with me. Direction, memory, identity. All that remained was me and the illusion of my presence. I wanted to scream. My throat constricted. No sound emerged. Only the oppressive silence pressing closer. And then I saw it. A faint impression in the mud ahead. Small, light, unmistakably human. But not mine. Something new. Something waiting. Something that knew I was here. I backed away, feeling the forest tighten around me, bending space, folding light, erasing the edges of reality. My own footprints, my own body, my own voice. They were gone or irrelevant. Only the cold mud, the silent trees, and the sense that I was a ghost wandering a world that had replaced me entirely. I turned, desperate, heart hammering, trying to retrace my steps back to the edge of the clearing. But the prints were gone. The path I thought I had followed didn't exist. The forest itself had erased it, leaving only endless trees, shadows, and a faint, impossible echo of my own vanishing. I didn't know how long I stood there, or if time even mattered. I only knew that when I moved again, my boots sank into the mud, leaving prints that faded immediately, as if I had never been. And somewhere deeper in the woods, something waited, patient, silent, watching. I realized with cold clarity that I was no longer a person in this place. I was an impression, a trace, a memory of something that had existed long enough to leave marks before being swallowed entirely. And in that moment, I understood I had arrived too late. The scream was gone. The voice was gone. The person, whoever they were, was gone. And perhaps I was next. It started quietly, quieter than I've ever known Pine Creek to be. The kind of quiet that presses against your ears and makes every little sound, every snap of a twig, every brush of leaves, feels sharp, like a warning. I remember thinking, as I drove the patrol route for the first time on this new shift, that something about the forest felt off. Even the wind didn't move the branches like it usually did. It was as if the whole place had been holding its breath. I parked the truck near the old ranger station, the one with peeling paint, and that sagging roof that looked like it might cave in any day. I sat there for a moment, listening. Normally, I'd hear the distant chatter of birds, maybe the rustle of squirrels chasing each other. But that day there was nothing, not a single bird song, not even the faintest hum of insects, just silence. I ran my hands over the steering wheel, tried to shake the unease creeping up my spine, and told myself I was imagining things. I stepped out of the truck, boots crunching softly against the gravel, and the smell hit me first. The damp, earthy scent of Pine Creek, sharp and heavy. I inhaled, trying to anchor myself in something familiar, something normal. I patrolled the stretch for years, and yet, even as I took the first steps toward the trail, my stomach twisted into a tight knot. The trees loomed over me, dark and still. Their branches didn't sway in the breeze. The leaves didn't whisper. It was like the forest had paused, frozen, waiting for something. I switched on my flashlight, even though it was barely past dawn, more out of habit than need. The beam cut a thin line through the dim light, bouncing off the trunks and the thick underbrush. My footsteps sounded unnaturally loud, echoing like I was alone in a cavern instead of familiar forest. And that's when I noticed it. The eyes. Not animal eyes, I tell myself now, but shadows in the corners of my vision that seemed to move just as I blinked. I would catch them at the edge of the light, and then they'd vanish, leaving nothing but darkness. I tried to focus on my patrol. My route was simple. Check the creek, the old bridge, the ranger cabins, and then loop back to the truck. Usually, I could hum to myself, think about my shift, maybe even enjoy the quiet moments. But today, my mind refused to settle. Every rustle, every snap of a branch in the distance made my heart leap. Even the soft squish of mud under my boots sounded like someone or something was moving with me. When I reached the creek, I stopped. The water was there, clear and flowing, but it made no sound. No babbling, no trickle over stones. Just a motionless mirror reflecting the gray sky and the skeletal branches overhead. I crouched to touch it, my fingers breaking the surface, expecting a cool rush of water, but it was still, like the creek itself had forgotten how to move. I pulled back quickly, feeling the first real chill of fear. Something was wrong. I told myself it was probably the early hour. Maybe the forest was quieter before the sun fully rose. Maybe I was just imagining it. But deep down, I knew that wasn't it. I knew the kind of silence that creeps before something happens. I could feel it in my bones, in the way the air seemed heavier around me, pressing down on my shoulders, my chest, even my thoughts. As I moved on toward the old bridge, I noticed the birds again, or rather, the lack of them. Usually, they'd be starting their morning songs, chasing each other, flitting from branch to branch. But here, there was nothing. The branches hung like still fingers, unmoving. The sky, a pale gray, gave the impression that even the light was holding its breath. I remember thinking, almost out loud, that I'd never seen Pine Creek like this. I told myself to relax, that it was just one of those rare mornings. But as I stepped on the bridge, the boards creaking under my weight, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. I looked over the railing, down into the shallow water. There was nothing. No fish, no movement, no ripples. Just a glassy surface reflecting the gray sky and the shadows of trees that didn't seem to belong entirely to this world. I paused there, gripping the railing, trying to make sense of the unease pressing on me. Then I heard it, a soft, deliberate crunch of footsteps behind me. Slow, measured, not hurried, but deliberate. I froze. My heart thumped so loud I was certain whoever, or whatever, was behind me could hear it. I slowly turned my head, expecting maybe another ranger, someone just out early, but the trail behind me was empty, not a single movement, not a shadow, nothing. I laughed nervously, the sound harsh and quiet. Must be an animal, I muttered to myself. Deer, maybe? But the laugh felt hollow, and the doubt crept in anyway. Deer don't walk like that. Not this close to patrol route. Not at this hour. I pressed on, my boots making soft thuds against the bridge as I crossed. Once I was on the other side, I tried to calm myself. I tried to focus on familiar markers. The twisted oak, the fallen log, the small clearing where I often stopped to check the map. But nothing looked quite right. The trees seemed taller, the shadows deeper. The air was thicker, harder to breathe, and all the while, the silence followed me like a living thing, pressing closer with every step. I reached the first ranger cabin, the one with the faded green door and cracked window panes. Normally, I'd leave it for later, but today I felt a pull toward it, an urge I couldn't explain. I stepped inside, the smell of old wood and damp earth filling my nostrils. Everything was as it should be, yet wrong. I moved from room to room, flashlights slicing through the dim, and tried to ignore the feeling that the walls were closing in. And then I heard it again, a whisper, soft, almost imperceptible. I froze, straining to catch it. There was nothing in the room, nothing at all. Just me, the silence, and that faint sense of eyes on my back. My breath quickened, and I pressed my hand against the wall, trying to feel solid, tangible, real. I told myself it was the wind. The wind made strange noises here all the time, but the wind didn't carry voices. The wind didn't feel like it was breathing down your neck. I left the cabin, heart hammering, and continued my patrol. The trail led back toward the truck, past the tall pines and through the patches of brush. I kept glancing over my shoulder, half expecting to see something or someone there, but nothing appeared. Only shadows, only that unbearable silence. Even the mud seemed to swallow my steps, absorbing them, so I could hear nothing but the sound of my own ragged breathing. By the time I returned to the truck, the sun had begun to peek through the clouds. The warmth did little to ease the chill crawling up my spine. I climbed into the driver's seat, hands still trembling slightly, and tried to make sense of the morning. The forest seemed normal now, almost too normal, the silence broken by the distant calls of birds and the trickle of water in the creek. But I knew what I had felt. I knew the stillness that had pressed against me, the sense that I wasn't alone. I started the engine, trying to shake it off as nerves, first day jitters. But deep down, I couldn't ignore it. Something had been there, watching, waiting, and I had the sinking feeling that Pine Creek had decided I was the next thing it wanted to notice. As I drove away from the creek, I kept glancing in the rearview mirror, half expecting to see a shadow following me. But the road was empty. Still, the memory of that oppressive quiet lingered. It clung to me, a weight pressing against my chest that I couldn't lift. And as I drove, I realized that the silence had only just begun. I don't know what I expected that first day. A calm shift, a peaceful patrol, maybe the routine comfort of knowing this forest. But Pine Creek had other plans. Something had shifted in the woods. Something I couldn't see yet but could feel. And I knew, in the deepest part of me, that it was only a matter of time before it revealed itself. The animals would stay silent. The wind would stop. And I would learn the hard way that some things are better left unseen. I could still feel the weight of that morning pressing on my shoulders as I walked down the narrow dirt path toward the cabins along Pine Creek. The sun had finally begun to break through the clouds, thin shafts of light falling between the branches. But even with the brightness, the forest felt heavy. There was something in the air that made every movement deliberate, like stepping wrong could wake it. I passed the first cabin, its faded blue paint chipped and flaking, windows clouded with grime. Usually I would glance inside, check for signs of wildlife or trespassers, and move on. But today, I hesitated. I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, not just in the forest, but in a more intimate, unnerving way. The hairs on my arms were standing on end, and I could feel the heat of my own fear creeping up my neck. I ran my hand along the railing of the small porch before I stepped inside. The door creaked as I pushed it open, and for a moment, I let my eyes adjust to the dim light inside. Dust hung in the air like a thin fog, motes catching the sunlight in brief, sparkling bursts. Everything looked as it should. The table, the chairs, the old stove, but the quiet was so complete, so unnerving, that it felt wrong. I walked to the window and looked out over the creek. The water flowed this time, gentle and soft, but it made no sound, no splash against the stones. Just a flat mirror reflecting the gray sky and the skeletal trees. I stepped back, suddenly aware of the echo of my own movements. My boots thudded against the wooden floor, light at first, then heavier as I shifted my weight. And then I heard it, a faint, deliberate tap-tap-tap behind me. I froze. My heart jumped. There was no one here, I told myself. The cabins were abandoned. The forest was empty. And yet there was again the sound of footsteps, slow, measured, echoing mine perfectly. I moved a step forward. Tap. Another step. Tap. The sound followed exactly, as if a shadow were tracing my every movement. I spun around, flashlight in hand, sweeping the beam across the room. Nothing. Just the same cracked walls, the same furniture coated in dust. I swallowed hard, trying to calm my racing heart, telling myself it had to be a trick of the acoustics. The old boards creaked in ways that made you hear things that weren't there. But it didn't stop. I moved toward the next cabin, each step deliberate now, testing, listening. Tap, tap, tap. My chest tightened with every echo. I dared to glance over my shoulder, half expecting to see a figure moving silently behind me, but the path was empty. Shadows stretched and twisted between the trees, but none of them belonged to anything living. The sound, though, the footsteps, kept coming, keeping pace with mine as though the forest itself had grown legs. I told myself to slow down, to let my eyes adjust, to let my mind catch up, but no matter what I did, the echo followed. I tried shifting my pace, walking faster. Tap, 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 slower. Tap, tap, tap. It was relentless. And with each repetition, the feeling of being watched grew heavier, like a hand pressing against my back, urging me forward into something I couldn't see. By the time I reached the third cabin, my hands were shaking. I leaned against the porch railing, trying to catch my breath, trying to convince myself I was imagining it. Maybe the silence yesterday had gotten to me. Maybe it had awakened some part of my mind that wasn't used to being truly alone in the woods. But I knew better. I patrolled Pine Creek for years. I know the sounds of the forest. This, whatever this was, wasn't natural. I pushed the door open, stepping inside slowly, flashlights sweeping across the room. The air smelled of damp wood and old leaves, faintly metallic, like iron. My boots made soft thuds on the floorboards, and for a moment, I almost wished the echo would stop, but it didn't. Tap, 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 and then something shifted. A pause, a hesitation in the rhythm, like the thing behind me was considering its next step. I stopped completely. The silence that followed was worse than the footsteps. I felt a prickling at the back of my neck, the kind that makes the skin crawl, the hair rise. I dared to glance over my shoulder again. Empty. Nothing moved. No one. Just the shadowed forest beyond the doorway. And yet, I knew I wasn't alone. I could feel it in my chest, in the tightening of my lungs, in the subtle vibrations through the floorboards. It was there, waiting, watching, enjoying the fear it was conjuring. I forced myself to move on, heading toward the next cabin along the path. Each step felt heavier than the last, as if the forest itself was trying to pull me back, trying to make me stop, to make me look over my shoulder one more time. Tap, tap, tap. It echoed my movements again, perfectly, in sync, unrelenting. I clenched my fists, trying to ground myself, to remember that no one was there. Yet every instinct in my body screamed otherwise. When I reached the cabin, I hesitated before opening the door. The wood beneath my hand felt colder than it should have. Almost alive. I shook my head, telling myself it was just nerves, that I was letting my imagination run wild. But deep down, I knew it wasn't. My flashlight swept across the room. Nothing. The same faded furniture. The same thick layer of dust. And still, the echo continued. Tap, tap, tap. I walked to the center of the room, breathing shallow now, trying to quiet the storm in my chest. I lifted my flashlight to the ceiling, scanning for anything that might explain it. Shadows clung to the corners of the room, but they didn't move like normal shadows. They twisted in subtle, unnatural ways, stretching and bending with the rhythm of the footsteps. I swallowed hard, fighting the urge to run. Then it came, the faintest whisper. I didn't catch the words, only a soft rasp, like someone exhaling just behind my ear. I spun around. Empty. Nothing. Just a room. The dust, the silence that followed, heavy and suffocating. My hands trembled as I gripped the flashlight. Knuckles white. I told myself it was my imagination, that I was just tired, stressed, letting the morning's weirdness get under my skin. But I knew it wasn't just that. Something was here, following, imitating, waiting. I left the cabin, moving back to the path, trying to keep my steps steady. Tap, tap, tap. It followed, faster now, urgent, as if whatever was behind me had grown impatient. I swallowed hard, forcing my legs to move. My breath came in sharp bursts, fogging in the cool air. Every nerve screamed to look over my shoulder. I didn't. I couldn't. I only forced myself forward, step after step, along the narrow, twisting trail. The last cabin loomed ahead, its walls darker than the others, almost black against the pale morning light. I approached cautiously, flashlight scanning. Tap, tap, tap. It was relentless, echoing, inhuman in its precision. I paused at the porch, gripping the railing, listening. My own heartbeat sounded deafening in my ears, mingling with the phantom footsteps that followed every motion. I pushed the door open slowly. Inside, the air was colder, heavier, smelling of damp earth and decay. I stepped in, letting the light sweep across the room. Nothing. Everything was as it should be, and yet I couldn't shake the feeling that I was standing inside someone else's eyes, watching me, judging me. The footsteps had stopped, or maybe they were inside my own head now. Tap, tap, tap. I froze, trying to pinpoint the sound. It wasn't the floorboards. It wasn't the walls. It wasn't the trees outside. It was me, or it was something that had become me. My own movements echoed, mirrored, distorted. My hands shook so violently I nearly dropped the flashlight. I wanted to call out to tell whoever or whatever was there to leave me alone, but the words stuck in my throat. I couldn't make a sound. I could only stand there, listening, waiting, hoping for a moment of normalcy that never came. Finally, I forced myself to step outside. The air hit me like a wave, crisp and sharp. The forest seemed to breathe around me, the leaves whispering softly for the first time that morning. But I knew better. The quiet would never be normal again. The echo would follow me. The footsteps that weren't mine would trace every move I made, and the forest would wait, patient and unyielding, for the moment I let my guard down. As I walked back toward my truck, the path felt longer, darker, heavier than it had when I came in. I kept glancing behind me, half expecting to see something, pacing me just out of the corner of my eye. Nothing. Only shadows. Only the twisting trees. Only the feeling that every step I took was being noted, mirrored, anticipated. By the time I climbed into the cab of the truck, heart still hammering, I knew one thing for certain. Pine Creek was alive in a way I couldn't explain. It had eyes, ears, patience. It could follow me without being seen. And the footsteps that echoed mine that morning were only the beginning. I sat there, hands gripping the wheel, staring out at the forest, listening to the wind finally move through the trees. But even with the normal sounds returning, I knew the echo of that morning would never leave me. Tap, tap, tap. It was a rhythm I could feel in my chest, a warning I could not ignore. And I had the sinking certainty that when I returned tomorrow, the forest would be waiting, watching, and the footsteps would be there again. The trail to the cabin was barely more than a faint path, hidden under a carpet of pine needles and fallen leaves. I had passed it countless times before, usually ignoring it, thinking it led nowhere, just another dead end swallowed by the forest. But that day, something drew me to it. Something I can't explain even now. Maybe it was curiosity. Maybe it was a pull of the unknown that Pine Creek seemed to wrap around every tree, every shadow. The closer I got, the more the forest seemed to lean in around me. The air grew colder, heavier, as though the trees themselves were exhaling, guiding me toward the cabin. It sat half hidden between two large pines, its dark wood blending seamlessly into the forest like it had grown there naturally. The roof sagged, shingles missing, and the windows were clouded with grime. From the outside, it looked abandoned, the kind of place you'd avoid if you valued safety. I approached slowly, hand hovering over my flashlight, mind trying to rationalize the pull I felt. I told myself it was just another cabin, empty, forgotten, but the moment I stepped onto the porch, I noticed the signs. Small, almost imperceptible things at first. A boot print in the mud, faint and fresh. A tin can, dented but not rusted, lying at the side of the steps. And then, through the grimy window, I saw it. A bed, neatly made, though the sheets looked like they had been slept in recently. My pulse quickened. Whoever had been here hadn't left long ago. And yet, there was no one outside. The forest remained still, quiet, watching. I pushed the door open carefully, stepping inside. The air was warmer than the outside, the faint smell of food lingering like it had been cooked only hours before. I could almost hear the echo of movement, of someone moving to the cabin, though the place was empty. The first thing I noticed was a small table near the corner, a plate with crumbs on it, a half-eaten loaf of bread, a tin cup still wet inside. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breathing. Someone had been here, someone human, and possibly watching the forest as closely as I was. I moved closer, my boots pressing softly against the creaking wooden floor, and then I saw the journal. It lay on the table, leather-bound and worn, the pages yellowed and fraying at the edges. I hesitated, a strange mix of fear and curiosity rooting me in place. I didn't want to know, and yet I had to. I opened it slowly, the pages rustling like dry leaves. The handwriting was uneven, hurried, almost frantic. Every night, I read aloud softly, my voice trembling. I watch them. They do not know. I stay hidden, unseen, and I see everything. A shiver ran through me. I glanced around the cabin, half expecting someone to appear from the shadows. but it was empty. The walls, the floor, the windows, they held no one, only the faint warmth of recent human presence. I turned the page. They move through the woods, unaware. Their steps echo, but they never hear me. I follow. I learn. Every sound is mine. Every shadow belongs to me. They do not see. The words made my stomach twist. The handwriting was shaky now, desperate. The journal detailed nights of observation, hiding near the creek, watching someone moving along the trails, tracing their steps, anticipating their actions. The fear in the writing was palpable, but there was also something else, something colder, a fascination, a hunger. I felt my hands tremble as I flipped through more pages, each one a little darker than the last. Sketches in the margins showed figures in the forest, some hunched, some standing perfectly still, always watching. Notes described patterns, routines, the rhythms of footsteps along the creek, the sway of trees in the wind. It was meticulous, obsessive, and completely unnerving. The forest outside seemed to respond to the journal, the shadows pressing closer, the air thickening. I kept thinking I heard movement, faint rustles just beyond the cabin walls. My heartbeat thundered in my chest. I reminded myself that the cabin had been empty for hours, or maybe days, but the journal's presence was proof someone had been here very recently. I stepped closer to the bed. The sheets were rumpled, small depressions in the mattress, suggesting someone had lain there, maybe even hours ago. The smell of human presence was faint, almost too subtle to notice, but it made the hair on my arms stand on end. I could feel the cabin itself exhaling, as if it remembered its last occupant and was aware that I had come. I glanced toward the window. The forest outside seemed to move differently, the shadows shifting just at the edge of my vision. I felt a gaze on me, invisible but unmistakable, pressing to the thin glass, through the walls, through my own skin. I couldn't tell if it was human, animal, or something else entirely, but it was there, always there, waiting. I opened another page of the journal. They think they are alone. They think no one is near. I am always near. Always. I felt a tightening in my chest, a coldness creeping down my spine. The words weren't just confessions. They were promises. A warning. The forest seemed to pulse with them, echoing the rhythm of some unseen heartbeat. Every rustle outside, every whisper wind to the branches, felt amplified, deliberate, like a signal from someone or something watching. I left the journal on the table, though I kept glancing at it. My mind struggled to piece together the implications. Whoever had written this had followed someone, studied them, knew their routines. And now, reading it, I felt a strange kinship with the unseen observer, as if the forest had chosen me as its next audience. I stepped toward the door, boots creaking, flashlight in hand, and then froze. A sound, footsteps, soft, deliberate, echoing my own. I turned quickly, flashlight sweeping the cabin. Empty, no one, but the air felt thicker, heavier, charged with expectation. My pulse raced, every nerve alive with tension. The journal's words seemed to come alive in that moment, wrapping around me, filling the room with the sense of eyes just out of reach. I left the cabin, stepping onto the porch, the sunlight failing to dispel the chill that had settled in my bones. I glanced back at the dark doorway, half expecting a figure to emerge, but there was nothing, only the forest, breathing, alive, waiting. And yet, I knew I was alone. Not really. The journal had left a residue, a presence that felt as though it had seeped into the wood, the walls, the very air. I walked down the path, leaving the cabin behind, but every step felt heavier. I could still feel the gaze, still hear the echo of footsteps that weren't mine, still sense the presence that had lingered in that small, abandoned space. The forest around me seemed quieter now, but the silence wasn't comforting. It was anticipatory. It was patient. It was hungry. When I reached the creek, I paused, looking at the water as it flowed, soft and gentle, reflecting the gray sky. I could almost imagine someone on the other side, hiding, watching, counting my steps. My hands shook, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. I told myself to breathe, to rationalize, to remember that this was just a cabin, just an old journal, just Pine Creek. But I couldn't. Something had changed. Something had marked me, just by letting me see it. I turned back once more toward the forest, toward the cabin that seemed so empty and yet so full of life. The shadows clung to the trees, dark and patient. The wind whispered through the branches, carrying a faint, almost imperceptible rustle, like cloth moving in a distant room. I swallowed hard, knowing that whatever or whoever had lived or was not gone, it was waiting, watching, learning, and I had been invited into its game, whether I want to play or not. The memory of that cabin would haunt me in every patrol, in every quiet moment, in every shadow that shifted at the edge of my vision. The journal had left more than words. It had left the knowledge of being observed, of being followed, of being studied. And I could feel it in my chest and my skin, in the tightening grip around my thoughts. The forest had grown a new voice, a new presence, and it was patient. I didn't run that day. I walked back to my truck slowly, cautiously, every sense alert, every nerve on fire. But even as I left the cabin behind, I knew it wasn't gone. It would wait. It would watch. And I would never forget the feeling of being seen, truly seen, by something that existed in the shadows between the trees. By the time I climbed into the cab of the truck, the forest had settled again, quiet and deceptive. But I could feel it in my chest, in the echo of my own heartbeat. The cabin, the journal, the unseen presence. It had marked me, and I knew, deep down, that I would return. I didn't know why. Maybe curiosity, maybe foolishness, but mostly, I think, because the forest had chosen me to understand, even if understanding came at the cost of my peace. The cabin in the woods was not just a building. It was a trap, a warning, a reminder that Pine Creek held secrets that did not belong to me, and yet, for reasons I couldn't name, I had seen them, and now I was a part of them. I never paid much attention to the creek before. Not really. It was just water, moving in its quiet, predictable way, bending around stones, reflecting the sky. But that day, it caught me differently. I paused at the edge, boots sinking slightly into the soft, damp earth, and for the first time, I really looked. The surface was smooth, unbroken, like glass, and I saw myself. My reflection staring back, pale, tired, eyes too wide from the morning's unease. At first, I thought it was just the angle, the morning light playing tricks. I squatted down, bringing my face closer to the water. The reflection didn't move when I shifted my head. Or at least, not exactly. My lips moved, forming a slow, deliberate smile I hadn't made. My hand lifted, brushing against the air, and the reflection raised its own hand in a way that didn't match mine. A perfect imitation, but not mine. I recoiled, stumbling back. My heart pounded in my chest like it wanted to escape. I pressed both hands over my face, tried to convince myself I was imagining it, that it was some trick of the water, the light, fatigue, stress. But I didn't dare look again immediately. My chest heaved, and my breath came in short, shallow bursts. The creek's surface rippled faintly, as if it had been waiting for me to notice. When I finally forced my eyes back to the water, the reflection was there, calm, watching. Not just my reflection, but something else, something that carried intent. The smile, slow and deliberate, lingered in the mirrored version of me. It didn't feel playful or friendly. It felt like it was testing me, teasing me, measuring me. I stepped closer again, the boots on the wet earth squelching softly. Every instinct in my body screamed to turn away, to run, but I couldn't. I was drawn to it, terrified and fascinated at the same time. I held my hands in front of me. The reflection did the same. But then, as I turned my wrist, it mirrored a gesture I hadn't made, a slow twisting, almost mocking. I felt a cold knot tighten in my stomach, the chill running from my gut to my fingertips. I whispered my own name. Is that me? My voice sounded small, pathetic in the vast quiet of the forest. The reflection didn't answer. It didn't move in any conventional way. But its eyes, I swear its eyes shifted, focusing in a way that felt sentient, aware, something more than a simple mirrored surface. I could feel inside my own head, a whisper brushing the edges of thought, like a thought that wasn't mine. I stumbled back, kicking a small stone into the creek. The splash was slight, but it sent ripples across the water. The reflection's face warped, stretched in the distortion of the moving water, but then it snapped back to calm, watching, smiling. A deliberate, patient smile. I swallowed hard, the taste of copper sharp on my tongue. I stepped forward again, my legs shaky. I wanted to test it, to see if it would mimic every move I made, or if it would start to act on its own. I raised my right hand slowly, fingers splayed. The reflection mirrored it, but then shifted its fingers into a gesture I hadn't thought of. Something deliberate, something mocking. My stomach knotted tighter. The creek felt deeper suddenly, darker, as though it had absorbed all the light of the morning. I wanted to speak, to demand it stop, to tell it I wasn't afraid, but my voice caught in my throat. Words felt meaningless in the face of this impossible presence. And then the reflection did something different. It moved independently, shifting slightly out of sync with me, tilting its head in a way I hadn't. I saw its lips curve into a smirk that I never made, and the realization struck me hard. This wasn't reflection. Not really. This was something else. Something in the water, waiting. I staggered back, tripping over a root. My palms scraped against the damp earth. I forced myself upright, chest heaving, eyes fixed on the water. The reflection mimicked none of my fear. It sat there calm, patient, smiling with a patience that made my skin crawl. I could feel it studying me, learning me, testing me. I clenched my fists, trying to anchor myself in reality, in the ordinary, but the ordinary had already left. I reached slowly toward the water, the instinct to touch it stronger than the terror. My fingers hovered over the surface. The reflection raised its hand first. Then I moved mine down. It moved before me. The water shivered, tiny ripples racing outward, distorting the reflection into shapes that didn't belong, shapes that lingered too long before snapping back into a semblance of human form. I jerked my hand back, my heart hammering, and then it did something impossible. The reflection moved closer, leaning forward, lips parting in a whisper I could not hear. A motion that wasn't mine. A gesture that didn't belong. I froze. My breath hitched. My eyes darted around, desperate to find the trick, the illusion, the mistake. But there was nothing. Only the creek, only the stones, only the trees reflected perfectly in the water. And yet there it was, that thing in the reflection, watching me, waiting. I remembered the journal in the cabin, the words of someone observing, studying, following, and now, staring into the water, I understood a little what that must have felt like. Except this time, I wasn't the watcher. I was being watched. My own reflection, or whatever that thing was, carried intent, knowledge, patience. It knew I was afraid. It knew I was vulnerable. I whispered again, What are you? My voice cracked. The water remained calm. The reflection didn't answer. Its smile widened subtly, unnervingly. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine, an icy dread that spread into my chest, coiling around my ribs like a living thing. I wanted to run. I wanted to scream. But the legs beneath me were frozen, uncooperative, as though the force itself was holding me in place. I stared into the water longer than I should have, trying to force logic into the scene. Maybe it was a light, maybe fatigue, maybe some weird optical illusion caused by the angle of the sun on the moving water. But no explanation fit. Not really. Not the way the gestures, the smile, the almost human awareness existed. Not the way my stomach nodded with each subtle movement, each tiny shift that the reflection made without me. I tried to step back. The ground felt too soft, too uneven. My boot slipped slightly in the mud. My reflection in the water did not stumble. It did not falter. It stayed perfectly upright, calm, watching, smiling. I realized then that it didn't mirror me anymore. It mimicked me only when convenient, and when it chose, it acted independently. It had agency. It had patience. And it had something more I couldn't name, something predatory hidden behind its quiet, measured movements. I forced myself to look away for a moment, to glance at the forest. The trees seemed normal again, swaying gently in the breeze, birds calling in the distance. But when I looked back at the creek, the reflection had moved again, shifting subtly in ways that made my stomach twist. My hand rose slightly. The reflection's hand stayed down, waiting, watching. Its lips curled into that slow, deliberate smirk. Fear tightened around my chest. I swallowed, trying to keep my voice steady. I don't understand. My words sounded small, useless, swallowed by the forest, and yet the reflection seemed to respond, tilting its head, as though hearing me, as though considering my weakness. I realized I couldn't just step away. Even as my body threatened to turn and run, some invisible force, some compulsion rooted me there. I couldn't ignore it. I had to look. I had to see. The reflection leaned closer again. Its eyes glimmered with something familiar, yet alien. It knew me too well. Every fear, every hesitation, every subtle twitch I hadn't even realized I had made. It was aware, and then in one fluid motion, it raised its hand, slowly, deliberately, and waved. Not a mirror of my movement, but a gesture all its own. A taunt, an invitation, a warning. I stumbled back, my legs finally obeying the panic in my mind. I wanted to run, but the forest seemed to stretch endlessly around me. Every step forward swallowed by the trees, by shadows. The creek behind me shimmered, perfectly still, perfectly watching, perfectly aware. I couldn't leave it behind. It followed me with every blink, every thought, every heartbeat. I glanced back one last time before forcing myself toward the patrol truck. The reflection remained in the water, unmoving now, waiting. Its smile had returned to that calm, patient curve that promised it was not finished. I swallowed, tasting copper on my tongue, the cold air clawing at my lungs. I knew that once I walked away, the forest and the creek would remain, the reflection would remain, and the memory of it, the knowledge that something in Pine Creek could imitate, anticipate, and mock me. It would follow me to wherever I went. By the time I reached the truck, heart hammering, sweat and cold mixing on my skin, I understood something I couldn't unlearn. Pine Creek had more than shadows, more than silence, more than the eyes of the forest. It had copies, reflections that were more than mere mirrors. And they were patient, waiting, watching, learning. Even now, when I think of that creek, I can feel the weight of that mirrored gaze. It was not human, not mine, not real, and yet it exists. Somewhere, always. I returned to the cabin that had haunted my thoughts all week, drawn by some compulsive need to see it again, to understand it. Even though every rational part of me screamed not to, the forest felt different as I walked the familiar path. Not just different, but hostile. The trees leaned inward, branches stretching like grasping fingers, their shadows long and dark against the muted gray sky. The air was heavier, colder, carrying the smell of damp earth, but beneath it all, a faint acrid tang that made my stomach twist. The path itself had changed. Where I remembered soft pine needles and patches of moss, there were only gnarled roots and cracked soil. My boots caught on twisted wood as I stumbled forward, heart hammering. The creek, my constant marker, the one that had reflected that impossible version of me, was nowhere in sight. Where there should have been water, there was only dry stones, cracked and pale, stretching outward like a wound in the forest floor. I froze, my breath caught in my throat. The creek had disappeared, completely. No water, no ripples, no reflection, only the still, broken bed of stone and earth. I stepped closer, cautious, fingers brushing over the dry surface. Nothing, just heat radiating faintly from the sun-soaked stones. The sound of my boots seemed unbearably loud, echoing through the unnatural silence. My heart thudded painfully against my ribs. Each beat reminded me that something was wrong. I turned toward the clearing where the cabin should have stood. At first, I thought I was imagining it, that the forest had swallowed the structure behind a wall of trees. But as my eyes scanned the area of reality, or something that passed for it, hit me, the cabin was gone. Not crumbled or hidden. Gone, as if it had never existed. No walls, no roof, no faint outline of a porch. Just empty space, the earth flattened, the ground like it had never been disturbed by human hands. I stumbled forward, gripping my flashlight tightly even though it was broad daylight. My mind refused to accept it. I called out softly, my own voice harsh and unfamiliar in the thick air. Hello. The sound seemed to vanish instantly, absorbed by the forest. I waited, listening for a response. for a hint of movement, a rustle, a creak. Nothing. Only silence. A silence that felt deliberate, hostile. I backed away slowly, scanning the trees. Every shadow seemed to twist unnaturally. Every branch curling at the edges, reaching just beyond the corner of my vision. I shook my head, trying to ground myself, try to remember that this was Pine Creek, familiar, ordinary. But the ordinary had left. Every instinct in me screamed that the forest was aware of me in a way it had never been before. A predator circling, patient and unrelenting. I returned to the dry creek, crouching to examine it. The stones were cracked, some broken into jagged fragments, as though something enormous had pressed down on them. But there was no debris, no footprints, no indication of passage. Just the earth itself, reshaped, defying explanation. I ran a hand over the surface, feeling the heat of the sun baking the stones, feeling the vibration of the forest humming to the ground, and it made me shiver. Something about the emptiness disturbed me more than anything. The creek had been my reflection, my confrontation, my warning, and now it was gone, replaced by something sterile, unyielding, and impossible. I could feel the absence pressing on me, squeezing the air from my lungs, twisting my thoughts. I tried to breathe slowly to calm my mind, but every inhale brought a weight, a reminder that I could not rely on the familiar markers of space or time. I walked along the path, trying to retrace my steps, but the forest no longer made sense. Trees were in different positions than I remembered, angles unfamiliar, trunks doubled or missing. The sunlight filtered through the canopy differently, casting shadows that didn't match my memory. My stomach churned. I stumbled over roots I hadn't noticed before, over dips and rises that didn't exist in my last walk. It was as if I had entered a place familiar, yet entirely new, a mirror of Pine Creek built to disorient and isolate me. I called out again, louder this time, voice cracking. "Hello, is anyone there?" My words echoed, but only against themselves, swallowed immediately by the thick, heavy air. I waited, straining for the slightest response, the faintest sign that I was still in the world I knew. Nothing, only the oppressive way of the forest, pressing down, testing me. I stopped near a cluster of old pines and tried to think. The journal, the cabin, the creek, it had all been real, or at least real enough for me to believe it. But now, each memory seemed fragile, like smoke slipping through my fingers. I pressed my hands against my face, inhaling sharply, try to calm the panic that threatened to consume me. I wasn't just lost physically. I felt unmoored in time, in perception, in sanity itself. I thought about the reflection in the creek, the doppelganger, the thing that moved independently, smiled when I did not, acted with awareness beyond my own. And now, with the creek dry and the cabin gone, I felt that presence more keenly than ever, though I could see nothing. It was here, always here, lingering, patient, and the forest, hostile and unnatural, seemed to have taken its side. I began to walk in a wide circle, trying to find anything familiar, anything that could guide me back to the truck, to civilization, to sanity. But every step felt heavier, every turn more confusing. Shadows shifted at the edge of my vision, corners of trees bending slightly impossibly. I caught glimpses of movement, always just beyond clarity, as if something or someone was trailing me, studying my reactions, learning my routines. I sank to my knees near what used to be the creek's edge, pressing my hands against the cracked stones, trying to feel some connection to reality. My reflection had been here once, a warning, a mirror of my own fears. Now there was nothing, only absence. I could hear my heartbeat, loud and irregular, and I realized I could feel the absence of water, the absence of structure, the absence of certainty pressing down on my chest. And then I saw it, a shadow, or maybe a shape, moving in the corner of my vision. I froze, every nerve taut. My mind screamed to run, to turn, to escape. But I stayed, forced by some mixture of fear and curiosity, watching as the shadow stretched, shifted, and then disappeared entirely. The forest held its breath, waiting. I felt it in my chest, in the hairs standing on end across my arms and neck. This was not random. It was deliberate. The forest itself was aware of me, marking me, testing me. I whispered my own name, barely audible. And Nick? My voice sounded foreign in my own ears, small and weak, swallowed immediately by the oppressive trees. There was no reply, only a faint rustle, a whisper of movement too subtle to identify. My mind raced. I had been here before, seen things I could not explain. Reflections, footprints, journals. And now, the forest itself seemed complicit in hiding something, reshaping reality, erasing the markers I relied on. I tried to move forward, walking along the dry creek, scanning for any sign of the cabin, the journal, any clue that I was still in the world I knew. But every step brought disorientation. The trees doubled back on themselves, roots twisted impossibly, earth rising where it should have fallen. The sky looked wrong, pale and muted, as if filtered through a lens I couldn't adjust. I stumbled repeatedly, heart hammering, breath ragged. The realization hit me fully. I didn't just lose the cabin or the creek. I had lost the forest I knew. I had lost my bearings, my sense of time, even my own certainty of being awake. The forest had become hostile, alive in a way I could not measure, reacting to me, shifting to disorient and isolate. And somewhere in that vast, silent maze, I felt the gaze of something patient, intelligent, aware. I pressed onward, forcing one foot in front of the other, listening for sounds that might guide me. The usual calls of birds, the rustle of small animals, the wind over the water, all gone. Only the crunch of dry leaves under my boots, amplified and exaggerated in the faint, impossible sense that I was being mirrored, tracked, followed. I didn't dare look behind me. I couldn't trust what I might see. Hours, or maybe minutes, time had become meaningless, past. I walked in circles and spirals, trying to orient myself, but nothing matched my memory. The forest was relentless, reshaping itself with every step, as though aware I was trying to escape. My lungs burned, my legs ached, my mind frayed at the edges, and always, just beyond perception, I felt the presence, waiting, patient, observing. Finally, I collapsed against a tree, pressing my face into my hands, shivering. I could feel the forest pressing in, shadows stretching, the air thick and heavy. I tried to ground myself, to remember who I was, where I had been, but the creek was gone, the cabin was gone, and reality itself felt malleable, fragile, unreliable. I couldn't trust anything. I realized then, fully and terrifyingly, that I didn't know if I was lost in space, time, or sanity. The forest had claimed its territory in my mind as much as in the world around me. I could feel the memory of the creek, of the reflections of the cabin. But those memories were faint, almost like echoes from a different life, distorted and distant. The present was all that mattered, and the present was hostile, incomprehensible, waiting. I whispered to myself, almost desperately, "This isn't real. This isn't real. I'm awake. I'm awake." The words felt hollow, meaningless. The forest responded with silence, thick, impenetrable, oppressive. Every instinct screamed that something was watching, shaping, waiting for the moment I let my guard down. And I knew, with absolute certainty, that I could not leave, could not escape, could not rely on the world as I had known it. The creek, the cabin, the reflections, they had been warnings, markers, invitations. And now, stripped of them, I was alone. Truly, impossibly, terrifyingly alone. The forest stretched endlessly in every direction, trees like dark sentinels, shadows thick and patient, air heavy and unyielding. And somewhere, just beyond perception, I could feel the presence, aware of me, tracking me, waiting for me to falter. I didn't know how long I would survive in this place, or survival even mattered anymore. Time and space no longer had meaning. I was a visitor in a world that had grown hostile and impossible, and there was no way back. I sat there, pressed against a tree, shivering, listening to the silence that had replaced the creek, feeling the forest close in, knowing that I was not alone. Not ever. And somewhere deep in the shadows, patient and waiting, I knew the watcher remained. The creek may have disappeared. The cabin may have vanished. But I had been seen. And once you are seen, truly seen, there is no escaping. The cemetery had always been quiet at night, The kind of quiet that makes your ears strain for sound and your imagination strain for sense. Normally, my patrols here were uneventful. Flashlights sweeping over rows of weathered headstones, the occasional rustle of a nocturnal animal, the wind whispering through the trees. But that night, something felt different. Not immediately obvious, not the kind of danger you can see, but a subtle wrongness that pricked at the back of my neck like invisible fingers. I drove slowly down the gravel path, the headlights cutting thin ribbons through the fog that had rolled in from the river. The graves, old and new, stood silent, the earth settling around marble and granite markers. Most of the stones were worn, names barely legible, some dating back a century or more. A place of remembrance, sure, but also a place where the past lingers like an echo you can't shake. I switched on the flashlight and stepped out of the patrol car, boots crunching on gravel. The air was colder than I expected, sharp and damp. I tightened the jacket around me, thinking about the quiet. Too quiet. The usual night sounds, crickets, the occasional hoot of an owl, the soft flutter of wings, were absent. It felt like the cemetery was holding its breath. I walked along the rows, scanning each headstone, checking for anything unusual. That's when I noticed it. Fresh earth, darker than the surrounding soil, recently turned and completely unmarked. No flag, no paperwork, nothing in the registry of burials. My stomach tightened. Fresh graves at night, with no record, weren't supposed to exist. I crouched down, shining my light over the mound. The soil was soft, the imprint of a shovel unmistakable. Whoever had done this had been precise, deliberate, and they had been very recent. I straightened up, scanning the cemetery for signs of movement. Nothing. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches casting twisted shadows across the headstones. The wind shifted, carrying a faint, earthy scent. Soil turned and disturbed, metallic in the air. I swallowed hard. My training told me to be cautious, to mark the location and report it. But another part of me, the part that always wondered about the mysteries others ignored, urged me forward. I walked closer to the graves. There were 3 of them, perfectly aligned, each identical in size and spacing. No headstones, no markers of any kind, just mounds of freshly turned dirt. The light from my flashlight danced over the surface, revealing the faint indentation of something buried beneath, though I couldn't see what. My heart thudded uncomfortably fast. Something about the symmetry, the silence, the careful placement. It felt intentional, almost ritualistic. I stepped back, trying to rationalize. Maybe a family plot gone unrecorded? A recent donation to the cemetery, not yet documented? But the registry I carried in patrol car didn't mention anything new. And the timing, midnight, was wrong. Too deliberate, too secretive. I took a few cautious steps around the graves, noting that the surrounding headstones showed no signs of disturbance. Whoever had done this had been meticulous, careful. I heard it then, a soft tapping, faint rhythmic, like fingers drumming on a wooden table. I froze, eyes darting around the darkness. It came again, slow, deliberate, almost measured, not a natural sound, not from wind or animal, from somewhere below the surface. It seemed, beneath the soil, beneath the roots, beneath the graves. My pulse quickened. I bent closer to one of the mounds, flashlight illuminating the disturbed earth. I thought I saw something move, a tiny shift, like the soil pulsed under my gaze. I jerked back, my breath catching. I wanted to tell myself it was nothing, just shadows, just imagination. But the sound persisted, soft, deliberate, coming from the very heart of the grave. Tap, tap, tap. I stumbled backward, scanning the cemetery for another source. My eyes fell on the headstones around me, but they were still unyielding, silent. The tapping didn't seem to belong to anything above ground. It came from the buried, the hidden, the soil that had swallowed secrets I wasn't meant to know. My stomach churned, the cold knot of fear settling deep. I reached for my radio, my hand shaking slightly. Dispatch, this is Deputy. I need a unit check on the cemetery registry. I found some unrecorded graves. 3 of them. Fresh. My voice sounded tight, unnatural. There was a pause, a faint crackle, and then static. Nothing more. The forested edges of the cemetery seemed to lean in closer, pressing against the light of my flashlight. The sound of my own breathing amplified in my ears. I tried to steady myself. I took a step closer to the middle grave, forcing reason back into my mind. I needed to see, to understand. The tapping stopped. Silence returned. The kind of silence that isn't quiet but heavy, aware. I crouched again, shining the light over the soil. No tools. No footprints around the mounds. Nothing. Whoever had been here had vanished completely. But the graves remained, intact, deliberate, and unrecorded. A movement at the edge of the cemetery caught my attention. I swung the flashlight, catching a shadow slipping behind a tree. Gone before I could focus. My pulse spiked. Someone was out there. Or something. My mind raced. I had walked alone at night plenty of times, but the sensation of being watched, patient, and deliberate was different now. The graves themselves seemed to pulse, as though aware of my presence, aware I was inspecting them. I stepped back, consider my next move. I should call for backup. Wait until daylight marked the location. But another part of me, the part that had been drawn to the cabin in Pine Creek, urged me to stay, to investigate, to confront whatever had left these graves. I gritted my teeth, forcing my fear into background, and took a tentative step closer again. Tap, tap, tap. The sound returned, faint and precise, as though coming from beneath the middle grave. I froze, staring down at the soil. My hands trembled, the flashlight flickering in my grip. I wanted to rationalize, to dismiss it as wind, as root settling, as animal movement. But it wasn't natural. It wasn't random. It was deliberate, a signal, a heartbeat from the buried. I felt the cold press of panic against my chest. I crouched lower, trying to hear more, trying to discern the rhythm, the origin. The tapping was irregular now, faster, urgent. Tap, tap, pause. Tap, tap. It had a language, a pattern I didn't understand but instinctively feared. The hairs on my arms stood on end. I wanted to flee, wanted to escape the unseen eyes pressing from the shadows, the buried reaching through the earth. I took a step back and stumbled over a root, catching myself against an old headstone. My flashlight shook, throwing uneven beams across the cemetery. For a moment, I thought I saw figures in the darkness, thin, elongated shadows that moved unnaturally between the trees. I blinked. They were gone, but the tapping persisted, slower now, deliberate, like a heartbeat I couldn't ignore. I forced myself to rise fully, shining the light around, try to anchor myself in reality. The graves looked the same, ordinary except for the unrecorded earth and the sense of presence they carried. I could feel it pressing in, patient, alive. It wasn't just the tapping. It was a knowledge that I wasn't alone, that I had intruded on something hidden, something buried and aware. I backed away slowly, radio still in hand, my mind racing through scenarios, rational explanations, possible perpetrators. But deep down, I knew this wasn't ordinary. This wasn't just trespassers or vandals. Something older, more patient, more intelligent than I wanted to believe had left these graves, and it was sending me a signal through the earth itself. I walked toward the patrol car, each step deliberate, scanning behind me constantly. The air was thick now, the fog clinging to my jacket, settling into my hair, carrying the faint scent of disturbed soil, of decay, of something I could not name. The cemetery felt alive, watching, waiting, every headstone a sentinel keeping count of my presence. When I reached the car, I paused, looking back. The graves were still there, unmarked, silent, but the tapping had stopped. For now, the silence was heavier than before, more oppressive, as though the cemetery itself was listening to me, judging me, remembering me. I got in, doors locked, engine started, lights cutting to the fog, but even as I drove away, the image of the unrecorded graves and the rhythmic tapping that had come from beneath the soil lingered in my mind. I couldn't shake it. I couldn't ignore it. Something had been buried there, something deliberate, something aware, and it had wanted me to know. Even now, days later, I can hear it. Tap, 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 beneath the earth, beneath the stones. A signal from the buried, calling out, patient and relentless, reminding me that some things in the cemetery are not meant to stay silent. I couldn't shake the memory of those unrecorded graves. Even in the daylight, the cemetery felt wrong, a place that had slipped some boundary I wasn't meant to cross. But nightfall always came, and with it, patrols. I told myself it was routine, that I was just doing my job. Yet the moment I stepped out of the patrol car, flashlight in hand, the world changed. The air grew heavy, each breath tasting faintly of earth and decay. The wind, when it moved at all, whispering ways that didn't belong to ordinary branches. I walked slowly along the old path, boots crunching over gravel, flashlight sweeping over familiar headstones. At first, nothing seemed unusual, but then I noticed the shadows. They weren't ordinary shadows. They flickered, twitching at the corners of my vision, dissolving when I tried to focus directly on them. Each time I blinked, they seemed closer, brushing the edges of perception, like the cemetery itself was shifting subtly around me. I stopped near a cluster of older stones, the ones leaning at odd angles from decades of neglect. That's when I heard it, soft, almost imperceptible, like wind through leaves. But it wasn't wind. A name, whispered clearly, distinctly, curling around my ears, brushing against my mind. I froze. My breath caught. Nick! I spun around, flashlight sweeping across the cemetery. Nothing, just stones, trees, and the pale reflection of my own tense face in the beam. I took a cautious step forward, listening. The whisper came again, this time several voices layered together, faint and distant, each syllable stretching unnaturally. Nick! 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 I swallowed hard, heart pounding in my chest. My rational mind screamed for an explanation. Old stones shifting in the wind, my own imagination, echoes from previous patrols. But deep in my gut, a cold knot told me that none of those answers fit. This was deliberate, focused, directed at me. I gripped the flashlight tighter, knuckles whitening, and moved closer to a row of older tombstones. That's when I noticed it. Subtle, almost laughably small, but undeniable. A small ceramic flower, the kind you leave at graves, shifted slightly from the day before. Not a lot, just enough to notice if you remembered precisely where it had been. My stomach sank. I walked down the row, shining the light carefully along the ground, scanning every small object, candles, stones, trinkets, and each one had shifted ever so slightly. Nothing dramatic, nothing obvious, but enough to tell me that the cemetery was moving, shaping itself, watching me. I stopped at a weathered marble stone, leaning slightly. My flashlight caught the carved letters, and I froze. Faint, whispering voices wrapped around me again, almost like the stones themselves were speaking. I bent closer. The whisper was a single word. My name again, this time clearer, almost inside my skull rather than outside. Nick! I jerked back, swallowing against a sudden dryness in my throat. My skin prickled. The air felt thick, each inhalation heavy, like breathing through damp cloth. I tried to tell myself it was imagination, that exhaustion and stress were bending reality, but I couldn't. My gut told me the cemetery was alive in some way I couldn't understand. I continued down the row slowly, scanning every stone, every object at its base. Shadows danced at the edges of my vision, flickering with movement that my eyes could never catch head-on. Sometimes it felt like something was leaning out from behind a headstone, just a fraction of a second, gone before I could focus. Each flicker made my stomach twist tighter. I crouched by a grave marker from the early 1900s, running a hand over cracked marble. The whisper surrounded me now, layering, overlapping, echoing off each other like a chorus of the dead. I pressed my fingers to my ears instinctively, but it did nothing. The voices were inside my head, echoing, persistent, demanding attention. Nick! 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 I stumbled backward, tripping over uneven ground, flashlight swinging wildly. The beam landed on a small pile of rocks I remembered distinctly. They weren't there yesterday, not exactly like that, and yet I was certain I had passed the spot without noticing any accumulation. My pulse raced. Objects, shadows, voices, it was all subtly, impossibly shifting, bending reality in small increments, testing me, watching how I reacted. I forced myself to take a deep breath and continued walking, scanning the headstones. Each whisper seemed more confident now, not hesitant or faint, but deliberate, like the stones themselves were naming me, calling me, reminding me that I was not a visitor here, but an intruder. My reflection in the flashlight beam caught my face, a mask of tension, sweat glistening, eyes wide and darting. I could feel the cemetery studying me. I stopped again, noticing another subtle movement. A small candle, I was sure, had been lying on its side yesterday. Now it stood upright, leaning slightly toward me, as though nudged intentionally. My hand shook. I crouched to examine it, running a trembling finger along its surface. The wax was cold, untouched by flame, but the shift was undeniable. My mind reeled. The cemetery wasn't just haunted. It was aware, patient, testing me in ways I couldn't name or measure. I stood again, flashlight sweeping over the tombstones. The flickering shadows returned, moving faster now, darting between trees and markers, gone before I could focus. The whispers persisted, layering, repeating, calling my name, circling me in ways that made my stomach lurch. I couldn't look away, couldn't turn my back. Every instinct screamed that I needed to leave, to run, to escape. And yet, some dark curiosity rooted me there. I had to see. I had to know. I walked along the perimeter of the cemetery, scanning the more recent graves, checking each mound, each flower, each token, and always subtle, small changes. A trinket slightly closer to the edge of a stone, a small indentation in the soil that hadn't been there. Each change was minor, almost imperceptible, yet undeniable when observed over time. It was like the cemetery was breathing, adjusting, reminding me I was never alone. I stopped again, flashlight trained on a row of older tombstones, and leaned closer to inspect a name carved into the marble. The whispering escalated, voices overlapping, louder now, closer, demanding attention. I pressed my palms against the cool stone, trying to anchor myself. My mind screamed that I shouldn't be here, that something was wrong, that I was trespassing in a place that had rules I didn't understand. But the whispers didn't stop. They called me, naming me, beckoning me to listen. I stumbled back, catching myself against another headstone. The flickering shadows had multiplied, twisting around the edges of my vision, darting in impossible ways. The object at the base of the stone shifted subtly, almost taunting me. I wanted to turn and leave, but each step seemed to place me deeper into the circle of awareness, as though leaving was impossible. I pressed my hand to a particularly cracked stone, whispering under my breath, What do you want?" The voices responded instantly, layering over each other, louder now, inside my head, echoing my own panic. I staggered backward, heart hammering, sweat running down my face. The cemetery didn't respond in words I could understand. Only gestures, shifts, whispers, shadows, tiny, deliberate movements that made my world tilt sideways. I tried to step forward again, to examine the middle graves, the unrecorded ones from before, but the air felt thicker, heavier, each breath burning my lungs. I forced myself to walk slowly, scanning, flashlight sweeping. Objects shifted again, stones, flowers, small tokens. Shadows flickered, darting, and the whispers continued, repeating, layering, chanting my name. I realized then that the cemetery was teaching me something I didn't want to know. It wasn't just a resting place. It wasn't just silence or memory. It was aware, patient, and each subtle shift, each whispered name, was a signal, a reminder, a boundary I had crossed without knowing. I shivered, gripping the flashlight like a lifeline. My eyes darted constantly, scanning for signs of intrusion or explanation. There was none, only the whispers, the shadows, the subtly moving objects, all perfectly deliberate. Time seemed to stretch, the night lengthening unnaturally as I continued my patrol. Each step heavier than the last. My legs ached, my mind raced, but I couldn't leave. I had to know what had shifted, what had watched, what had whispered my name. Each name, each small movement, felt like communication, proof that the dead, or something beyond the dead, were aware. And they were patient, watching, waiting. Eventually, I returned to patrol car, heart hammering, hands trembling, flashlight swinging. I tried to shake it off, to tell myself I had imagined everything. The whispers, the shadows, the subtle movements. But deep down, I knew I hadn't. The cemetery had marked me in ways I couldn't see, in ways I couldn't measure, and the echoes of its awareness would follow me beyond a gravel path, beyond the headstones, beyond the night itself. Even now, when I close my eyes, I hear the faintest whisper, the softest movement, feel the subtle shift of objects just out of sight. The cemetery doesn't forget. It watches, it names, it waits. And I know, as surely as I know my own heartbeat, that it is patient. The night had grown colder, heavier, and I felt it pressing against my chest as I returned to the row of unrecorded graves. I had tried to shake off the whispers, the subtle movements, the flickering shadows, but they clung to my mind, gnawing at the edges of my sanity. Every patrol since that first discovery had been a battle to convince myself that I was imagining things, that the cemetery was just old, creaking, and full of wind and shadows. But deep down, I knew I wasn't. I had crossed into something else, something patient, deliberate, and aware. When I arrived, I noticed immediately that one of the mounds had collapsed slightly, not entirely, just a shallow indentation, as if the earth beneath it shifted or been disturbed from below. My flashlight beam fell across it, revealing the uneven surface, the small ridges and cracks. My stomach clenched. The first instinct, the part of me trained to maintain rationality, said someone had dug too deep. A caving of soil, natural, routine. But the other part, the part that had heard whispers and seen shifting shadows, told me to stop pretending. This was deliberate. This was not natural. I crouched, flashlight in one hand, notebook and pen forgotten in my pocket. The smell hit me first, a faint, damp metallic tang, earthy and almost coppery, that made my stomach lurch. I leaned closer, scanning the collapsed soil, and that's when I saw it. Handprints. Not faint depressions, but clear, desperate. Clawing impressions pressed into the earth, as though something had tried to reach upward from the dark soil below. My breath caught in my throat. I leaned closer, squinting in the beam of the flashlight. Each handprint was small but distinct. The fingers splayed, pressed into the soft dirt, the palms almost lifting out of the shadows. I pressed my gloved hand to one, and the earth felt unusually cool beneath my fingers, unnaturally damp, almost like the soil was holding its breath. My pulse quickened, hands trembling. For a moment, I thought I was seeing things. My mind, stretched thin by nights of whispers, shadows, and subtle shifts, wanted to rationalize. Maybe a dog had dug. Maybe some animal had clawed at the soil. But the handprints weren't random. They were deliberate, human in shape, desperate in posture, and they were reaching for something above. For me, I straightened up slowly, heart hammer in my chest, and shone the flashlight around the collapsed mound. The other graves were still, silent, unyielding. But this one had an energy, a tension that was almost palpable, as though the earth itself had taken a deep breath and was holding it. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my racing thoughts. I wanted to call it in, report it, bring backup. But even as I considered it, a whisper brushed across my mind. Not outside, not carried by the wind. Inside. Clear, deliberate. Nick. I froze. My pulse skipped. I swallowed against a lump in my throat. My body frozen with a mixture of fear and awe. The voice wasn't angry, wasn't pleading. It was patient, expectant, knowing I would respond, knowing I would see what I was about to see. I crouched again, closer, flashlight illuminating the edges of the collapsed soil. The handprints were deeper than before, as though the soil had shifted slightly while I wasn't looking. I blinked. They hadn't moved, had they? My chest tightened. My mind raced. I knew better than to touch them again, but I couldn't look away. The hands were pressing, reaching, desperate and deliberate. Something was below, struggling against the soil, signaling, calling, trying to reach out. I took a cautious step back, my flashlight sweeping the cemetery. The other stones remained motionless, unremarkable, but the shadows between them flickered again, subtly, as if the darkness itself was breathing. I felt eyes on me, or something like eyes, a sense of awareness pressing from below and around me. I swallowed hard, forcing my hands to stop shaking, but the whispers returned, layered and overlapping. "Nick, help, help!" It wasn't a scream, not quite. More a plea, more a signal. And then, the impossible part, I realized it wasn't just one voice. Multiple voices layered over each other, calling my name, each syllable carrying an urgency that made my skin crawl. I wanted to leave. I wanted to run. But my feet were rooted, drawn here, compelled. I leaned closer again, unable to resist. The handprints seemed to pulse under my gaze, shifting slightly, deepening, as though whatever was beneath the soil was testing me, gauging my reaction. I swallowed against the cold knot in my stomach, the flash of irrational thoughts flaring. Could it be alive? A human? Something else entirely? I had seen whispers, flickers, movements. Now this, the pattern was clear. The cemetery was aware, patient, communicating in a language I could barely comprehend. My flashlight trembled in my hand. The collapsed soil shifted again, more noticeably this time, as though a fist or a hand had tried to push upward, brushing against the surface. My heart nearly stopped. I bent closer, desperate and terrified, and my mind screamed to retreat. But I couldn't. I had to see. Then I noticed something even more unsettling. Tiny, irregular scratches surrounded the handprints, almost like claw marks, etched into the soil around them. The shapes were too deliberate to be random, yet too small to belong to any animal I knew. My pulse raced, my vision narrowed, flashlight shaking. Something had struggled to get out, had fought against the earth, had left these marks for me to find, for me to see. I stepped back, hands pressed my knees, trying to steady my breath. Every instinct screamed that I was trespassing, that I should leave, that I should drive straight to the station and report this immediately. But the whispers persisted, insistent, insidious, curling around my mind like smoke. "Nick, see help." I shook my head, trying to ignore the voice, to rationalize, to ground myself in reality. But then the handprints shifted again, faintly, imperceptibly, almost like a heartbeat beneath the soil. My breath caught. My hands shook as I tried to focus. Flashlight beams sweeping the grave, scanning the edges. Each movement of the soil was deliberate, purposeful. Whatever had been buried here, whatever had reached for me, had not given up. I crouched lower, closer than I should have, and ran my fingers along the edge of the mound. The soil was unnaturally soft, almost damp, pressing against my gloves in ways that didn't make sense for undisturbed ground. And beneath it, faint but unmistakable, pressure, a subtle push against my fingers, almost like a pulse. My stomach twisted violently. My heart thundered. I staggered backward, flashlight swinging wildly, trying to orient myself. Shadows flickered between headstones, darting impossibly fast. Whispers layered over each other, repeating, demanding, calling my name. I felt the weight of the cemetery pressing down on me, patient, aware, deliberate. I wanted to flee, wanted to abandon this place entirely, but some dark compulsion held me in place. I had seen the handprints. I had felt the pulse beneath the soil, and I could not unsee it. I forced myself to kneel again, shaking hands brushing the edges of the grave, flashlight sweeping. The air was thick damp, carrying the faint coppery scent of soil turned and disturbed. The whispers intensified, more distinct, clearer. They weren't just calling me. They were guiding me, pulling me into the rhythm of something older, something patient, something that had been waiting for me. I pressed my face close to the soil, the beam of the flashlight illuminating the desperate handprints, the scratches, the subtle ridges. My breath hitched. The whispers, layered, insistent, circled my head. I felt the pulse beneath the earth, faint but steady, reaching, waiting. I wanted to retreat, wanted to escape the unseen grasp pressing from below. But the compulsion was stronger. I had to witness it. I had to see. For a long, impossible stretch of time, I crouched there, hands hovering over the handprints, flashlight beam shaking, sweat running down my face, listening to the whispers, feeling the soil pulse beneath me. Each second stretched, thick and heavy, like the night itself had stopped to watch. And in that moment, I understood this was not a grave. Not really. It was a signal, a marker, a doorway, and whatever lay beneath it was aware of me, waiting for me. When I finally stood, legs trembling, back aching, flashlight being weak in my grip, the whispers lingered, faint now, like the echo of a heartbeat. The collapsed soil remained, handprints faint but undeniable. Scratches etched in the edges, the subtle signs of something reaching upward, trying to emerge. I took a step back, then another, scanning the surrounding graves. All was still, yet I knew better. The cemetery was alive, patient, aware, and had left me a message. The buried were watching, waiting, reaching. I left the grave row behind me slowly, flashlight sweeping, heart hammering, mind reeling. Even as I returned to my patrol car, even as I drove away, I could feel the pulse beneath the soil, the desperate reach of the buried, the faint whispers curling in the edges of my consciousness. I knew I had been marked, called, and observed, and I knew, with a certainty that chilled me to the bone, that the buried had not finished. The cemetery had sent its signal, and I had answered,